Hello friends, this is Odds until the NDA expires, and today we're going to be revisiting the best builds for each killer. From the Trapper, the very first killer, to the Cenobite, the 25th and latest edition. Now, despite having 25 unique killers with their own unique powers and having upwards of like 80 plus perks to choose from, you will see, unfortunately, that many of these builds are basically identical. You're going to be running Corrupt Intervention to slow down the gens, Ruin to slow down the gens, Pop to slow down the gens after Ruin is gone, and Tinkerer so that you know where to go to also slow down the gens. This is a little bit sad and unfortunate, but it's the sad reality of the very stale meta that this game encourages. That being said, I will be providing lots of alternatives, explaining in depth why each perk works particularly well on each killer, so that you have a deeper understanding of how you can give it your own spin and eventually find the build that works best for you and your playstyle. If any of the information in this video seems outdated, if you watch it in the future, please check the link in the description. You will find a spreadsheet that is kept online that I keep up to date with all of this information and more, so that if anything changes in a patch from now, a few weeks from now on, you will see that reflected in there. That spreadsheet also has information of the best builds if you don't have any teachables, if you're starting out, and the best builds if you require barbecue because you want to get more blood points on your killer. All of that and many other things can be found there, so it's worth checking out. With that being said, we're going to be starting with the Trapper, our first killer. If you want to skip to any other killer, of course, the timestamps will be in the description as usual. Now, for Trapper, my best recommended build would be Corrupt, Pop Goes the Weasel, Stay the Best for Last, and No Way Out. Now, Corrupt Intervention, or first perk, I think is the most non-negotiable pick. If you could only run one perk on Trapper, I would recommend you pick this one. With Trapper, you have a very, very difficult balance to achieve at the start of the game. If you don't use any of your traps, you will waste the perhaps best opportunity to set up traps while the survivors don't know that you're a Trapper and don't know where you are. It is entirely possible that after you find your first survivor, if the match doesn't go well, you could go the entire rest of the trial with survivors constantly looking at you and calling out your position, making it very, very difficult to put any trap on the ground that is not going to be immediately called out. So at the start, you need to set up at least some traps. However, if you set too many of them, it's also possible that the area that you choose to set these traps ends up being a complete dead zone where survivors do not ever walk into, and this can also backfire hugely if you lose too many generators. So for that reason, you need to find the balance of maybe 2 to 3 traps early on as you advance through the map. And with Corrupt Intervention, you have a huge insurance that you will not start to lose several generators after that. With Corrupt Intervention, survivors will effectively be pushed towards you, and if you're smart and set your traps right, this will be a hugely beneficial trade-off for you. I highly, highly recommend it. In indoor maps where it is hard to set traps because there's basically no grass, this perk is really, really good. In very, very large maps where it's hard to keep pressure in one side of the map because the map is so large, this perk effectively makes a third of the map basically empty, so that you don't need to worry about it for the next few minutes. And in the average map, it will help you as well. I think you should always run this perk if you want to have your best shot at playing Trapper. And if you're not gonna run it, what would my alternatives be? You could run Discordance to know where multiple survivors are and be a lot more aggressive since the beginning, although it is risky. You could run Whispers, even with Corrupt Intervention. Whispers is actually a pretty decent perk on Trapper. You can set a few traps, and when survivors get close to you, Whispers will trigger, letting you know that it's time to start moving. But realistically, if you're not going to run Corrupt Intervention, I think your best shot is to run Ruin, and then set up a trap or two and immediately run to the generators that you know survivors have spawned on top of, and try to contest them, and those 30 or 40 seconds they spent on those generators hopefully washes away. Otherwise, you will have a very, very difficult time with Trapper. Next up is Pop Goes the Weasel. Now, Pop Goes the Weasel is not a perk that intuitively works really well on Trapper. You're not a killer that's going to get a lot of downs early. You're not a killer that will constantly be downing people across the map and that moves very fast and can pop gens quite a lot. but it still works really, really well in the end. Even if you only use it half as many times as some of the other more agile, aggressive killers, it's still very much worth the time. If you hook a survivor in an area that you need to commit to, and a generator there is 90%, if you step anywhere away from that area, that generator could pop, and now your very carefully designated area is gone, and your traps there are useless. Keeping an area and even a 3-gen near the end of the game is extremely important, so even if you only use pop very few times during the match, it will be very, very important to help you secure that area where your traps are. Because unfortunately, the sad reality is, as a trapper, you need to keep your traps close to each other so they feed off each other, and close to yourself, or else survivors could escape a little bit too quickly. So pop, by all means, works really, really well. The only reason I wouldn't run it is if I already had Ruin, or I was gonna go for a very, very aggressive sort of build. What are the alternatives to this? You could run Search. I think Search will conflict with our next perk, and thus I don't recommend it. But if I didn't have Save the Best for Last on our next slot, I would run Search. It's not a bad perk. Also helps a lot with the 3-gens. Also gives information around you, which is useful and difficult to gather. Or maybe I would double down on Hex perks. You don't need to defend generators if you're going to kill everyone very, very early and get Devour Hope going, or get lots of pressures from hooking in the basement and trigger and haunt the ground. So you could run Corrupt Intervention with a bunch of very aggressive Hex perks and forget about generators for a little bit. Perks like Devour Hope and Haunt the Ground are particularly useful on Trapper for a number of reasons. Mostly you can trap them, and if it's Haunt the Ground, you can trick survivors into thinking that it's a really strong perk and actually have them trigger Haunt the Ground. Whereas with other killers, they might just ignore Hex totems altogether. But otherwise, I think Pop is a very, very safe choice that will more often than not help you out a lot. Our next perk is Save the Best for Last. Now, in this category, I really think Trapper needs a perk to help out his lethality. He, as I said, needs to keep an area that is heavily trapped where survivors can be constantly brought into. If you have no other perks, Agitation can fill this role quite nicely. You got a survivor, he's a little bit far from the basement, or he's a little bit far from the area that you have your traps around, doesn't matter. With Agitation, you can pick up, even if they try to take a hit, it doesn't really matter. You will go back to that area, bring them back, keep everything under control. If you have an insta-down perk, such as Starstruck, which can fit this role quite nicely as well, this can also work out, make it very difficult for people to save each other, maybe down someone before they can make it very far into the map, and so on and so forth. Now, I think Save the Best for Last serves all of these roles and is a really, really, really good multi-purpose tool. Let's think about it in a number of ways. If you chase a survivor that is healthy and you hit them without this perk, they will most likely use the speed boost from your hit, if they're smart, to run the hell away from whatever area they think you have trapped. If they notice that you have not been to a certain part of the map, they will take that hit and run you there, and it will be very, very difficult for you to commit to that person. If you don't down that person, well, they're injured, but you don't have a down. And if you do chase after them, it will take a long time to catch them, potentially, if you don't have traps or whatever they're running. And once you do catch them, you will literally have nothing going for you there. With Save the Best for Last, you can hit a survivor and make it much harder for them to escape. If you already have several stacks, you will catch up before they outrun you to a particular location, and it will be easier and easier to keep them in your turf. This also goes for basement situations where survivors are grouping up. One of them is being rescued from a trap, you can hit them and then very quickly hit another. You're going down the basement, someone tries to take a hit, you can hit them and recover faster while you're carrying, which means you'll have an easier time getting to basement or finishing up that hook. Another thing about Save the Best for Last that is really, really important is that you can bypass its main downside by using your traps correctly. If you are chasing the Obsession and you can corral them into a trap, you can grab them out of the trap, and that will completely bypass Save the Best for Last, which means you won't lose stacks. Believe it or not, the better trapper you are, this will happen fairly often. If it's not your Obsession, then obviously you will want to hit them out of the trap and gain a stack as you down them and apply any other effects like Sloppy Butcher from your basic attack. So the one downside of Save the Best for Last, you can bypass slightly by using your power correctly. One more thing to keep in mind, even if everything else fails, even if you don't have a basement, even if you do not have a area that you've designed, that you've tried to fill with traps, Save the Best for Last is still a very, very good basic killer perk. If you end up going to the hospital, if you end up going to a map where trapping effectively is very, very difficult, this perk will still carry you. If you think about the Trapper as a killer that can deny certain loops, let's say that there are 10 pallets in the map that you're playing. And out of those 10 pallets, you have trapped 3 of them. So effectively, there's 7 pallets. The quicker you recover from a hit, and the quicker you catch up, the quicker you will force those 7 pallets to now be 6, and now be 5, and now be 2, and now be 0. So being able to shorten the chases and deny strategic pallets and windows here and there will make this perk stronger than it already is. So for that reason, even though there are certainly alternatives out there, I think Save the Best for Last is probably the best out of them all, and the one I would recommend the most. Now, for our last perk, we have No Way Out. No Way Out is honestly a very, very sweet perk on Trapper. You could have other perks on this slot that could help you throughout the match. Nurse's Calling is not a bad idea to find people out of position. Infectious Fright would help you snowball, and it wouldn't be a terrible idea, although you have to consider the fact that people will be running Unbreakable and anti-slugging perks. So even though there are other options that I would put here, you could also put a second Hex, you could put more slowdown. There's definitely ideas to put here. I think No Way Out will give you the most value. No Way Out right now is a really strong perk. Since you're a Trapper and you don't typically have the option to choose who you have to chase, if a survivor is in a spot and they're about to step on a trap, you cannot just ignore it. You need to pressure that. You cannot always pick your fights the same way other more agile, versatile killers can. You will often find yourself in situations where you've hooked everybody once or twice, but no one is dead. And this can often mean that despite being on the verge of being dead, everyone is still alive and they can still do gens just fine, open gates just fine. Not with this perk, however. This perk can help you a lot, especially with the other ones. You will have a strong final 3 gen with Pop. You will have strong chases with Save the Best for Last with several stacks near the end. And then you will have this trump card at the end of your matches. If you preemptively trap one of the exit gates, they will not be able to touch the exit gates very quickly. In fact, one of the exit gates they might not be able to touch at all if you are nearby, so they'll have to touch another exit gate. And when they do, now they'll have to wait a very long time before they can actually open it. In this time, you can camp someone to death if you need to. You can wrap up another chase with one of the very few pallets left. You can go for the person opening the gate and kill them off. This will do a lot for you. When this expires, you can go and trap that exit gate as well. And not to mention, the Trapper already has a very, very deadly hatch situation when you close a hatch and the last survivor basically has no chance to escape because you can trap one of the gates and go after the other. With this perk, a 3 kill typically turns into a 4 kill in an almost guaranteed fashion. So if that's something you care about, it is also very, very powerful. I think it is a very safe perk. And if you learn to play around it with Trapper, you are uniquely good at getting the value out of it. But as I said, several other alternatives are available if you choose. And with that, you have a pretty good idea of what you should run on Trapper. This is also, of course, assuming that you're running average add-ons, typically a bag, as well as something else to support it. If you have a build specifically tailored to running certain add-ons, and playing around certain elements of the map, like just going for basement and whatnot, that can be okay. But I do tell you, this is probably good at what Trappers does best, and is a good alternative and a good insurance against maps where Trapper would typically not perform as well. So that's all for Trapper, and we're gonna move on to the next killer. Next up on our list is the Wraith. And the Wraith, a little bit of word of warning, comes with many strong add-ons that almost behave like perks themselves. So any build that you do on the Wraith will probably have to take your add-ons very much into consideration. And if you do it correctly, the add-ons and the perks often build up on each other and they are very, very, very powerful. That being said, if I were to run no add-ons or basic add-ons or certain combinations of common add-ons for the Wraith, I still think this build would do really, really well. This build consists of Lethal Pursuer, Hex Undying, Hex Ruin, and Hex Devour Hope. Very heavy hitting, but risky. If you wanted to run something a little bit more consistent and average and normal and regular, you could go the route of like Corrupt Intervention, Pop Goes the Weasel, Surge, and something like Barbecue and Chili. That would be a perfectly good, decent build. But what makes the one I recommend perhaps even better? Let's talk about the first perk, Lethal Pursuer. At the start of the match, if you have no information perks at all as a Wraith, you're still probably going to have a really good time finding someone early. In fact, if you run something like Discordance or Corrupt, it's very, very easy to bump into survivors very, very quickly. However, if the survivors are very aware, or they're very smart, or they're very lucky, or all of those things, something bad could happen. A survivor that you find could just happen to be on a super strong pallet, meaning that your first ambush will be less effective, obviously, and then you'll be reduced to being a normal killer. And if this survivor happens to be in a group, he could also call you out to other survivors who from now on will not give you an easy free hit. And if you don't get a free hit at the start of the match, it could mean that your first chase could take a long time. And as a killer that doesn't have the ability to immediately down people later or anything like that, that could be really, really tough. With Lethal Pursuer, you have a chance to make a decent early game into a winning early game. A survivor that goes into the open with Lethal Pursuer will be very, very easy to ambush from the perfect angle because you'll literally see them. Survivors on generators will be immediately shown to you, so you'll know where to bother them, and with Ruin, that will be powerful. And if you have certain add-ons, such as the Silent Bell, the Coxcomb Clapper, or Ghost plus the Yellow Bone Clapper, like, these things can allow you, with a bit of skill and ingenuity, to literally grab survivors off gens if you have the chance. But even if this doesn't happen, having a guaranteed really, really good chance to make your first chase very, very short, I think is a great thing with Wraith. Also helps a lot in some of the larger maps where finding survivors can be tough. So it's good insurance in maps like Haddonfield that you will immediately be applying pressure onto the survivors and they will not hide and make the first chase very, very difficult. Being able to see a survivor run at the start can also give you an idea of where of which survivors will run spin burst and whatnot. The way they play also can even give away in the very first few seconds the fact that they may or may not have spine chill. In fact, if you know where a survivor is at the start, you can look away to immediately full spine chill, and whether the first chase goes well or not, whether you decide to commit to the first chase or to spread out to other survivors, with Lethal Pursuer, you will know exactly where all of them are, and you'll be able to take the extra few seconds to take the best route not to be spotted and have a successful second chase and second ambush after your first one. That's why I rate it really, really high. Although I acknowledge other perks could do just as well, and if the survivors you're playing against are not very good, this sort of perk will not help out too much. After this first initial perk, we have the wombo combo of Undying, Ruin, and Devour. If you are spreading out to multiple survivors trying to do a bit of hit and run, Ruin should be felt. It should be a difficult perk to deal with. And Devour eventually will make you really fast, really unpredictable, and a one-shotting monster, which means that even medkits, even dead hearts, things that you will constantly see more and more at higher MMR, will not be as effective. For that reason, with these three perks, they will need to bother to cleanse at least 2 totems, which means you have a lot more time to catch them off guard, you have a lot more time to spend in chases, you have a lot more time to get someone killed early on. If one of the survivors happens to spawn next to one of your totems immediately with Lethal Pursuer, you can see it and you can potentially interrupt it, which is also a good thing. But even if you lose these gens at some point, they will probably need to do many of them. If you are applying good pressure and they cleanse your Undying and your Devour, the Ruin will still be very annoying. And if they happen to cleanse your Undying and your Ruin very early, Devour cannot be ignored as long as you get a few hooks early on. So for that reason, I reckon these perks are very, very, very valuable. However, as I said, other regular, more common perks are also completely good. Barbecue and Chili with this killer's mobility is amazing. If you have a bit of an anti-healing build going on, Nurse's Calling is also an excellent perk. Many M1 perks like Surge or Sloppy Butcher are very good depending on your add-ons. And again, just depending on your add-ons, a lot of perks can make sense on this killer. So by all means, feel free to experiment. Moving on. Time for the Hillbilly. He is a killer that can uniquely take advantage of some of the strongest perks in the game. He's going to be the first one that I recommend the combination of Ruin and Pop Goes the Weasel on. This is a very counterintuitive combination. Ruin is a very strong perk, but since it won't let you kick generators yourself, you cannot run it and use it at the same time as Pop. But in reality, this combination is actually very, very strong and pretty much part of the meta. If you have the ability to quickly go from point A to point B, reach any generator that you need, and threaten to insta-down near it, survivors will need to respect your presence. They'll need to leave generators even if they're very close to being done, and Ruin is very, very strong. If you're capable of snowballing, which means you quickly build out the pressure by downing multiple people, even if they're healthy with your Chenso, other survivors will probably need to let go of their generators and make Ruin really, really painful. Even if Ruin is gone early on, as long as you've applied a little bit of pressure, having Pop for the rest of the match is a really, really good backup. So either way, you're going to be completely fine with these two perks. Although I completely understand if you feel like it's too much and you'd rather swap one of them out for something else. Corrupt Intervention is also a perk that is safe to run on him, especially if you know what you're doing at the start of the match and you have a good understanding of survivor spawns. I personally find that some of the other perks that we'll talk about might be better in general, but do know that people run Corrupt Intervention or Hillbilly with these two perks or instead of one of these two perks. So another safe choice if you wish. To further enhance your control of generators across the map, not only do you have mobility, you will have very reliable information in the form of Tinkerer. Tinkerer will let you know when a generator is about to be done. It will also remove your terror radius, which means you will have a slightly better chance to approach and detect it if you're very close to land the Chenso, or to use your Chenso and not be heard from us far or as easily. If you use one of those several add-ons that change his terror radius or make his Chenso silent, the Apex Muffler, Tinkerer can work even better in many maps and secure your hits on generators on unsuspecting survivors. So it's a perk that has good synergies with some of his strangest add-ons, if you want to go that route. Alternatively, other perks that could give you a lot of information, Discordance, Barbecue especially, I think are really powerful. With Barbecue in particular, you can find survivors that are out of position and use your Chenso against them, which in some maps is really, really powerful and terrifying. But either way, you will have a safe perk that gives you information and the ability to catch someone off guard with a one-shot down. Tinkerer, I think, is the no-brainer go-to choice. As for your final perk, if you want to have a bit of insurance that you'll be able to use your power effectively and you won't be immediately put against the ropes by good survivors using strong windows, I think Bamboozle is a very safe perk. Not only do you vault windows faster, allowing you to catch up and maybe hit an M1, it also blocks the window from being used again, turning it potentially into a death trap for a survivor that can now fall to your M2, to your Chenso, and immediately go down. So a survivor that would typically drop a pallet, and then hug a window for 20 minutes before going down now has to be a lot more careful because there is the threat of you blocking the window and putting them in a bad spot. Bamboozle can turn you into a bit of a predictable monster, so be very careful when using it. Do not show it to the survivors earlier than you need to. It is a bit predictable on Hillbilly. It's not quite a rare sight, but it is for a very good reason that it is there. Alternatively, if you don't have Bamboozle or you want something else, other perks that can help you in Chase. Enduring, or the combination of Enduring and Spirit Fury, also helps you deal with pallets if you're not going to run up an add-on like the low pro chains that can let you play around pallets a little bit better. And obviously information perks that let you snowball are never a horrible idea. You could run Infectious Fright to know who is around you when you down someone. You could run the always useful Lethal Pursuer if you want more information to be able to catch whichever one survivor is out of position at the start of the game and secure an early down. Other perks such as No Way Out, that would give you a chance late game to reel the game back in, are also not a terrible choice. And mostly try to think about which weaknesses you're trying to cover. If you're going to use a map offering, or if you know that you're going to go to a certain map, some of these perks are a bit more questionable. So try to think about what situation you're most afraid of as Hillbilly, what is your particular weakness and strength, and maybe find the 1 or 2 perks to help you combat that. And you should be alright with Hillbilly. Arriving to the nurse, we have a tremendously powerful character that is also extremely good at utilizing the art of the strongest perks in the game. For that reason, stacking slowdown on her is, in my opinion, tremendously effective. And I would suggest, if you're going to go all out, to bring Corrupt Intervention, Ruin, and Pop Goes the Weasel. This is absolutely disgusting. With Ruin and Pop Goes the Weasel, you will have a constant pressure and threat. If you down survivors very quickly and have to pull their teammates off gens to come help, Ruin will eat through those gens. If you block the furthest away gens with Corrupt and you only have to worry about 4 generators, it is very, very easy to pressure them with high mobility and make them regress automatically, of course. It will also give you a little bit of information. Every time a survivor leaves a generator, you'll see a puff of smoke. So even from afar, you'll know exactly where to go and how to blink, which is useful. And when that is gone and you're fighting for the last few gens, if it gets to that, Pop is still an incredible backup if your Ruin gets cleansed. Very powerful stuff and extremely disgusting to deal with. Your final perk here being Lethal Pursuer. Lethal Pursuer will literally show you the auras of everybody at the start of the match. With certain add-ons, such as the range add-ons, you can turn this into an immediate free hit and an immediate first chase, and if you're good, an almost immediate first down, making every other perk so much stronger if now 3 survivors have to spread out, do gens, but also look out for you and secure the first rescue. Very, very powerful. Lethal Pursuer is by no means a must-have. You can replace it with a more basic perk like Barbecue and Chili, which will give you good, decent information, or Tinkerer, which will help solidify your grip on the generators. But depending on your add-ons or the map that you might send yourself to, Lethal Pursuer can be very much worth it, as it covers your weakness of not having information early on and being a slow killer that is not particularly good at patrolling. With Lethal, it's impossible, obviously, to hide and stealth out the first 2 minutes of Corrupt Intervention. So with this, you have a very, very solid all-around build that you could absolutely tweak to your liking. If you already like Pop and you're confident in your ability to down, you might not even want to run Ruin. You might want to run something else more consistent to help you fight survivors. More information perks or anything like that. Or more slowdown perks such as Sloppy Butcher, which is also a great slowdown choice on Nurse, and makes things a lot more difficult in the mid game. But by all means, there are many other builds that would work really well on Nurse. For instance, she is uniquely capable of abusing and using Hex perks. So if you wanted to go an all Hex route, you could run Devour Hope and Ruin and protect them with Undying. Now with these 3 perks, as long as you're applying pressure and downing survivors, they will not be able to ignore them, and they will need to at least do 3 totems. If you are applying the pressure, Ruin is going to hurt, and it will be very, very hard to power through it. Devour, of course, will eventually kill them, literally, if they don't deal with it. And because Undying will protect one of these totems at least once, they will literally have to go through 3 totems. If you're also running the other perk I suggest, Retribution, the final one, every time they do one of these totems, they will be showing themselves and everybody else for 10 seconds. And 10 seconds of auto reading is not only useful information, it's also incredibly powerful on Nurse for her to use in chase. A survivor that's trying to lose line of sight behind a wall, but if you can see their aura, that really makes no difference. So Retribution basically cuts off one of their major resources to use against you in chase, and if they have to go through 3 totems at least, or 2 totems at least, that's 20 seconds of auto reading to help you in chase and to help you understand where people are hiding and where people are preparing to go for rescues, so that you force them off gens even more. Incredibly disgusting build, especially in the right map against the right people. But by all means, Nurse is very, very powerful. If you are good enough, you can get away with running only very basic information and slowdown perks and just rely on your ability to kill them super early. Other insta-down perks such as Starstruck, such as Haunt the Ground, such as Make Your Choice are perfectly good filler perks that you can put in this or any other build. So with Nurse, you really have a lot going for you with add-ons that are basically good for every situation. So you'll probably be looking at something like that. It's time to talk about the best build for Huntress, and in doing so, you'll realize that it's actually very difficult to find synergies with some of the perks that are common on other killers. Perks that induce stealth are not very good on her because she has a large lullaby. Basic attack perks don't work super well because you need to use your special attack more often than not. And she doesn't have a lot of mobility and needs to reload, which makes some of the perks that are very, very obvious picks on other killers a little bit harder to use on her. That's not a horrible thing. She's still a very strong killer. Very, very experienced Huntresses will make each hatchet count, and the perks will be more of afterthought. Very new Huntresses will start with very bad teachables, and they'll start to pick up a few cute perks here and there to help learn how to hit hatchets from close and long distances. Barbecue and Chili, Ammo Ears, Bitter Murmur are all excellent picks for things like this. But if we take into account that we're going to be playing against good survivors, that we're going to be playing in a number of maps, do we want to rely on some gimmicky perks? No, you probably want to bring the most consistent build possible, and I think this might be one of them. The first perk is almost non-negotiable. It is Corrupt Intervention. This perk essentially makes the map smaller for the first 2 minutes. It pushes survivors towards you, forces them to move, and as a killer that doesn't have a great mobility to find survivors at the start or patrol a very large map, this is very, very, very good. If you go to an indoor map that's difficult, Corrupt Intervention is particularly good on those maps since it forces survivors to search for generators that are not easy to find always. So this also helps out in the largest maps, in the indoor maps where you might typically suffer without it. So I say Corrupt should probably be a staple of your build. If you're not going to run Corrupt, the first gens will be hard to defend unless you bring Ruin and can somehow harass people out of them. Definitely not impossible to play without Corrupt, but it's a very good perk that you probably want to bring as a staple part of your build. Next up, we have Pop Goes the Weasel. Now, Pop Goes the Weasel on Huntress is very hard to use. You don't have a lot of mobility. You need to down and then reload, and you need to slowly walk towards the generator, kick it. It's really not the best option, but we don't have that many options left. Much like Trapper, you're not going to be using Pop Goes the Weasel as many times as some of the other more aggressive killers. However, if we consider that we're running Corrupt Intervention, the first 2 minutes, we only have to worry about 4 generators. And if your hatchet's at on point, you could be getting down very, very fast. Even if you down 2 people and only get to use one user pop on a generator, that is very, very good. After all, you're a killer that is territorial, that cannot roam around the map. So if you down survivor next to a gen that's nearly done, you need to be able to defend that generator and not just kick it and have it be completed shortly after. So for that reason, Pop Goes the Weasel actually comes in quite clutch to help you defend an area for some time and make the most out of it. Goes well with Corrupt, even though, as I said, it's a little bit hard to use. On our next perk slot, I would dedicate this perk slot to any information perk, perhaps even other specific perks to help you find survivors. So Barbecue and Chili, for example, would work really, really well here. Bitter Murmur is a bit predictable these days, but it's still a very good perk. It will let you know where survivors are shifting towards. It will let you do some cross-map hatchets if you line them up right. All of them great options. Bitter Murmur also works well with our next 4th perk, but the one that I find most consistent, that I personally prefer, is Lethal Pursuer. Lethal Pursuer will show you the auras of everybody at the start. With Corrupt Intervention forcing them towards you, you will have a choice of who to go after. And if you're a decent hunter, you'll be able to identify which situations are to be avoided and which survivors are actually in a place where you can reasonably down them quick enough. After you down that survivor, you now have a decent idea of where the other 3 are going and which generator needs to be popped. If you go to a map that's typically difficult and annoying for you, such as Haddonfield or Badham Preschool, these are some of the worst case scenarios, you now see where everybody spawns and you do not need to go building by building, knocking on the doors, asking if a survivor is there. So I think this perk helps out quite a little bit in these really bad scenarios. Our final perk, out of all the possible ones, I recommend No Way Out. No Way Out is great. With Huntress, it's very, very difficult to have a choice of who to go after. You're not going to be able to roam around the entire map and quickly tunnel a person out of the game and then try to hold the game from there. It's very possible that you might need to stick to an area. It's very possible that near the end of the game, you have hooked everyone, but no one is dead quite yet. And this perk is great in almost every possible scenario. If you're doing super well and you're already winning, this perk will not get in your way. In fact, if you close the hatch, it will basically guarantee that you get the 4th kill. But if you're not doing so well, that's where this perk really comes in handy. You can camp someone on their final stage and have this perk give you 2 or 3 extra kills even. You can allow someone to be unhooked and commit to a person that's dead, knowing that if they take too long to heal and they don't touch an exit gate soon, you will have more than enough time to interrupt them. And it's basically a very all-terrain perk that works in a number of different scenarios and doesn't require any specific setup other than getting some hooks throughout the match. So in my opinion, it's a very, very good versatile perk that will save you in a number of scenarios. That being said, there are so many other builds that you could try on Huntress. If you want to have a lot of slowdown and just worry about the immediate chase and the immediate next decision, Ruin and Undying are very, very good choices. You could even pair this with Deadlock, the newest perk that we've added to our arsenal from the Cenobite. And this is a really mean build that allows you to slow down gens a lot. Survivors won't be able to do gens to spawn next to. They will need to find at least 2 totems. And even if they find these 2 totems, Deadlock will still be slowing them down, allowing you to have a lot of passive slowdown without really doing anything. You just need to focus on what you're doing. When a generator is blocked by Deadlock, it is true, Ruin doesn't affect it. So it's not like Ruin is going to work through Deadlock, but it is multiple layers of generator defense and plan B, plan A sort of stuff. So I've tried this build. If you do not struggle to find survivors and it's just the speed of the game that's your problem, this could be worth it as well. Another build that I'm very fond of that doesn't have nearly as many hexes and that is much less RNG dependent and that I found to be very consistent is the following. We go back to Corrupt Intervention and Pop. This combo that we talked about before, but instead now we add Thrilling Tremors and Agitation. So at the start of the game, you focus on finding one survivor, you focus on downing them as quickly as you possibly can, and when you pick them up, you're going to try to use Pop on the closest possible gen. Thrilling Tremors will block the generators that are not being worked on, so any generator that you see colored white will either be blocked by Corrupt or blocked by Thrilling Tremors. And any generator that you see colored red, that's a generator that has someone on it. And you're going to use the perk Agitation to immediately carry the survivor towards there. Now, typically as a Huntress, you don't have a lot of choice of where you hook survivors. If they happen to go next to the basement, wonderful, you can put them in the basement. If they happen to be down next to a generator, wonderful, you take advantage of that. But it's very, very hard as a low mobility killer to push them where you want. So this is where Agitation comes in handy. If there's a basement anywhere near, you can use it. If there's a gen being worked on anywhere near, you can hook them right there and then pop the gen. And because you're a territorial killer, you can constantly have multiple things to defend at once. So you can have a generator and the hook, or a generator and someone in the basement. And I found that this is a very consistent build if you want to know what to do next and you are a Huntress that easily gets distracted and loses their purpose. That being said, tons and tons of different builds on Huntress. The very good Huntresses only run some basic information perks and some basic chase perks like Iron Maiden to reload faster, which is, I think, is a bit gimmicky. I don't think it's the most consistently great perk ever, but it does work out for them. So for Huntress, maybe it's best if you just understand that it's more about your skill, how you use your add-ons, and the occasional help from the perks, rather than your build carrying you. I don't think Huntress is a killer where your build needs to carry you for the most part. So yeah, keep that in mind, and mostly do have fun playing her. Next up is Michael, aka the Shape. And Michael has some strengths, but also weaknesses that need to be accounted for in your build. The first perk, which I almost consider to be non-negotiably a must-have on Michael, is Corrupt Intervention. Now, with Corrupt Intervention, you will be blocking away the further 3 generators so that survivors are forced to come towards you. And for a killer that desperately needs to get out of tier 1, that is huge. You have a lot more chances to find random survivors running through the middle of the map, running right into you, or approaching a generator that you have already set up camp next to, ready to stalk them if they're not aware, to get out of tier 1 as quickly as possible. If you're not going to run Corrupt Intervention, you probably want to have some other perks, such as Discordance, to immediately find a group of survivors so that you have the best possible chance to leave tier 3 as early as humanly possible. Obviously, the fact that you can down a survivor in tier 3 early and then only have to worry about 3 or 4 generators is also a major plus if you manage to do that in under 2 minutes. But just for the early tier 1, Corrupt Intervention is already a very, very significant improvement to your gameplay, and you will be glad you brought it. Now, for the other 3 perks, you have a variety of choices. I found the strongest, perhaps not the most consistent and the easiest to use, but I found the strongest combination to be Hex Ruin, Hex Undying, and Hex Retribution. With Ruin, you really have a really good chance to make generators bleed out and lose progress because of your temporary map presence once you pop tier 3. If you catch a survivor, put them next to 1 or 2 generators, and suddenly down someone else and you have tier 3, those generators in the vicinity need to be respected. You are a tier 3 Myers that can insta-down, vault windows a little bit faster, and have a bit of a lunge. So typically survivors will need to respect the area, and they will need to do these totems. You might realize that if you are running Corrupt Intervention, they are more likely to do these totems, but that is okay. Them doing totems is totally fine, it's totally expected. It in fact will buy you time to get rid of some pallets, get your tier 3 going, and so on. So it's not something that is necessarily a downside. In either 2 or 3 cleanses, they might get rid of your Ruin because of Undying protecting it, and because we have another Hex perks. But this is actually part of the plan. Undying will protect your Ruin, yes. It will also show you the aura of someone by a dual totem. There will be 2 dual totems, so it could also help you out at the start and throughout the match by giving you random information about where one survivor is. But the most important part is that with Retribution, you have at least a guaranteed 2 instances of survivors revealing themselves and everyone else. Now, chasing a survivor who's in a very, very good spot with your tier 3 is very challenging. Even if you're very good at using your extended lunge, even if you're very good at using your increased ball speed, there is no guarantee that that survivor won't have a string of windows, pallets that they will happily drop, because that's your only power. I found that with Retribution, you cut these chases off by a lot, and you use your tier 3 in a lot more creative and smart ways. Instead of having to chase a survivor and pop your tier 3, you will instead have a survivor cleanse a totem, you look around yourself, and you will find a survivor hiding next to a tree, or hiding behind some boxes, or hiding behind some rubble. And then you'll use tier 3 on that down survivor, and instead of having Infectious Fright to hear everyone around you with your small or big terror radius, you will instead have Retribution to know that the other 2 survivors are really close, and thus you should go for them, or they are really far, and thus you have time to pick up and secure that hook. So the information of Retribution, not only will it give you free bounce, it will also give you free information on what to do next, potentially winning you the game. If you want to use the best tier 3, if you want to use the time of your tier 3 as best as possible, this perk comes in clutch several times. And if they want to get rid of your ruin, they will at least have to give it to you once, twice, or maybe even 3 times, which is pretty damn good. At least 2 times, realistically, this perk will do something huge, which is awesome. And it is a perk that is not always predictable, and if they cleanse the perk itself, it will give no indication to the survivors that you have it. So you could have a survivor hide behind a crate and get insta tier 3'd and insta down by you and not realize what exactly just happened, because this perk is not at all that common. I believe this to be a superior version of another build that you might see commonly on Michael, which has a similar idea behind this, but has Bamboozle as well as Infectious Fright. Now with Bamboozle, you will wall windows even faster on top of the natural higher speed of Michael. And with Infectious, you will have the people around you scream. And with some add-ons, this can make sense. And I understand the point of such a build. However, I think this one to be the superior. If you are not really into using hexes, of course, if you want to see this build in action, I'm sure I have a video somewhere that you can check it out. And this was the build we used to get 50 wins in a row on Michael, if you're interested. But if you are not convinced by the hex idea, a better build that I would recommend would be using Pop, Surge, and Tinkerer. Now, instead of Tinkerer, I would also really like to run Surveillance, but Surveillance at the moment is bugged and sometimes gives you false information. But if Surveillance ever gets unbugged, Surveillance and Tinkerer would both be really, really good perks as the fourth. The idea behind this build is very similar. We have Corrupt Intervention. We will block the furthest generators. We won't worry about them for a little while. And when we down a survivor, with Surge, the generator that they were working on potentially will immediately start to go down. If you have Surveillance, you will also immediately begin to track it. And if someone touches it, you know that you have to go there. And instead of worrying about that generator, now you're going to hook that person and go to whichever other generator is available and go there with a pop. And then with either Tinkerer or Surveillance, you will have information of where the survivors are acting up. If a survivor is doing a generator a little bit far, with Tinkerer and tier 3, you can approach, maybe undetected, and stab them. If they have Surveillance and they touch a gen and they try to be sneaky and hide, they won't know that you have Surveillance, so they won't know that you know. You'll be able to go back there and figure out where they are and down them. And this build is quite aggressive. It's more of a generator defense sort of build, but it can also work really, really well, and basically is good insurance for some of Michael's hardest maps. Namely the very big ones that have generators in the open, where it's really hard to get good stalks going on. And obviously, by virtue of not being a hex dedicated build, it's also a little bit more consistent and it's a little bit easier to run. You don't need to pay attention to your totems nearly as much. With that out of the way, I basically cover it. Michael has some really fun and transformative add-ons. So obviously, if you're going to use a tombstone, you might consider running things like Play With Your Food. If you're going to run Infinite Tier 3, you will probably not care about some of the choices that we said. If you're going to run one of the gimmicky mirror add-ons, then some of these perks, obviously, you would completely reconsider. But strange and gimmicky add-ons aside, this is a decent idea that you could follow for good results on Myers. And now it's the turn of the Hag. The Hag is a tremendously powerful killer, especially against unsuspecting and unprepared survivors. I believe her to be one of the strongest killers in the game. She also happens to have a very low dependency on add-ons, even though her add-ons are good, and on perks. If you play your cards right as Hag, you need very few perks. Your power will be doing most of the heavy lifting. And because what you do is mostly territorial, you set up in one place, you hit people, you defend them. You don't necessarily go out to kick gens, you don't necessarily go out to find people hiding. And as such, you don't need a lot of perks to counter gens or counter stealth or anything close to that. That being said, if you play her at higher and higher MMR, you will be playing against smarter and smarter survivors that will more and more harass you, mess with your prep, make it very difficult for you to set up and keep things up, and punish any mistake you make very, very heavily. So, what are the perks I would recommend if you want to be ready for that? It would be something similar to this. The first 2 perks I think are very, very safe picks on Hag. The first one is Corrupt Intervention. Now with Corrupt Intervention, we run into a similar issue as a Trapper. You will be pushing survivors towards you, which means you will have naturally less time to set up. I think, just like Trapper, this is still a really, really good trade-off. It is very possible that your early setup might fail, and if you fail with your setup and also lose 3 gens in the distance, that will set you up for a very difficult match. With Corrupt Intervention, if you are very, very smart about setting up and follow certain guidelines that are well understood by people that play Hag a lot, even someone running into your web early is not that big of a deal. So with Corrupt Intervention, you will have survivors slowly going around the map, maybe opening chests, maybe wasting more time than usual, eventually running into your traps, yes, but also not popping 3 gens in the distance where you typically have no influence because you as a Hag should be tending to a certain side of the map. So I still think it's absolutely worth it, and if you do not run this perk, you just have to assume that the first few generators that are furthest away from you will probably be completed, and should to a degree be completed with a lot of resistance. If that's the case, it's okay, you don't need to replace this perk for something else, you can just acknowledge that, but you will need to change your attitude. And remember, just because you don't run Corrupt Intervention, that doesn't mean that one survivor will not also just run into you. So without Corrupt Intervention, you could be in a situation where you have 3 survivors and generators being completed very fast, and 1 survivor doing all kinds of harassment on the traps you've already begun to set. So for insurance, I say run Corrupt Intervention. The next perk is Deadlock from the Cenobite, one of the latest perks to be introduced to the game. And this perk works as a small Corrupt Intervention. I like to think of it as a mini Corrupt. And it is very, very good because of its passive ability and what it brings to the Hag. Now with the Hag, at the start of the match, you will be tending and creating a web. Once survivors step on it, you will constantly be trying to corral them into deeper and deeper parts of your web, eventually downing them, eventually hooking them, eventually defending them, and not really minding generators too much. You can run perks like Pop for the occasional time you might kick a gen in your area, or Surge so that you can hit some gens around yourself as you down people. But for the most part, these perks don't perform extremely well and are not, in my opinion, the hottest idea. They just don't have a lot of synergy with your playstyle. However, Deadlock is perfect in this regard. If they have 2 generators that are about to be done in the distance or even nearby, when one of them pops, the other generator that's closest to being completed will get locked by the entity for 30 seconds. And during those 30 seconds, they have nothing to do except come to your Lion's Den and get harassed and get hit and lose a health state and perhaps more. So being able to passively slow down generators from across the distance while simultaneously getting information of which generators are going to pop next and where the survivors might be coming from next in the next few minutes, it's actually really, really powerful. And it is a very, very strong pick for Hag, regardless of map, I would say, with almost no downsides, considering that your other perks are not necessarily geared towards regressing generators. So I would say very safe pick. It really is a very safe and easy perk to use, which I value a lot. Now your other 2 perks depend on quite a lot, and you have a lot of options. Let me talk to you about the ones I would recommend overall, but also about their many, many alternatives. For the 3rd perk, you will want something to help you in your mid game. My choice, which I think is most fun, is Save the Best for Last. Now, unlike Trapper, you don't have a real ability to save stacks of Save the Best for Last. If the Obsession steps on the trap and you teleport and you hit them, you don't have much of a choice, you're going to lose some stacks. But that doesn't matter because overall, you're going to be slapping a lot of people left and right. And even if you don't build a lot of stacks super fast, eventually you probably will get some stacks. And overall, the hitting non-obsessions will outweigh the hitting the obsession part. Obviously, if you have a choice of who to hit, you will also go for non-obsessions. This is particularly important on Hag. If you don't already know, the Hag cannot teleport to traps while she is busy mid-animation. Which means that if you hit a survivor who just triggered your trap, they can now run through 3 of your other traps while you recover, and you will lose all of them. This forces you to keep your traps somewhat far away from each other. With many stacks of Save the Best for Last, your gameplay will begin to shift. You will now place traps very close to each other, and a survivor that steps on one will get hit, and then by the time he steps on the other, you will be able to teleport already and hit them again, getting 2 more stacks of Say the Best for Last in the process. So it's a machine that oils itself and truly makes you an unpredictably strong monster in the mid to late game. That being said, there are still chances that the Obsession could be a survivor with a flashlight that's constantly harassing you, and you get little value out of this perk in some matches. That is a completely valid concern. If you want to run a perk that would give you slightly more consistent value, Sloppy Butcher is a great alternative. Every time you hit someone with Sloppy, they will absolutely drop the take a little bit longer to heal, and that means you gain time. That means they don't heal, and next time they step on a trap, they're dead. So Sloppy is a safe choice as well. Another very, very attractive option to combat healing, especially if you see a certain amount of items in your lobby, which I would honestly think is even better than Say the Best for Last, is Franklin's Demise. Now, obviously, I cannot recommend Franklin's Demise as a blanket perk if there's no items in your lobby. So this is a situational utility perk, let's say, that you will bring on certain occasions. But Franklin's Demise on Hag is tremendously powerful. It was before, now even more so than before, for a number of reasons. Reason number 1, when you hit a survivor with your power, without your power, no matter what, it will be a basic attack with Hag, which means every time they'll drop their item. When that item gets dropped, you can now trap it, which means that even if they go back and pick it up, they will waste time doing so, and the longer they take to pick up the item, the more charges the item will drop. So a medkit that could give them 3 heals now will give them 1.5 maybe, and a flashlight that could have been used to disarm many of your traps will now be almost depleted, and they'll need to be a lot more mindful of how to use it. And that's assuming that they get to pick it back up. If they don't get to pick it back up, the item will lose all of its charges, potentially rendering it useless for the rest of the match, which is really huge for you, considering that medkits and flashlights, which are both very common items, are quite strong and could be annoying to deal with as a Hag. So Franklin's could be an absolute game changer for Hag. And then, of course, we have other options as well. Agitation, which I recommended on Trapper as a passing thought, is also a really sweet perk on Hag. Getting free hits on anyone is not a bad idea. Getting to the hook faster can also prevent survivors triggering multiple traps while you're busy and cannot teleport, effectively wasting your time. Being able to get back to your area, to your web of traps, or to the basement where you'll make a really difficult nest to come out of. All of those things are amazing, and Agitation, despite being a somewhat underwhelming perk of many killers, is an absolute banger for the Hag. So it is also a perk that I would highly suggest you check out. In an old time, I would have also recommended the perk, the combination of perks actually, Monitor and Abuse and Nurse's Calling. With Nurse's Calling, you will very often find survivors hiding in corners of the map where you can choose where to approach to push them towards the area that you know will get them hit. This is very important. It's not the same chasing a survivor into nothing and having them hold forward and being basically impossible to catch up to, and seeing them run into the area where you know they will run into a trap or another. So Nurses is very good and works particularly well with Monitor and Abuse. With Monitor and Abuse, obviously they won't hear you from as long, which means that they'll be more likely to heal and make mistakes. It also means that at the start of the match, they will not be able to immediately locate you and harass you and know that it's a hack, which is really powerful. It also means that if you drop chase with them, the terror radius will immediately disappear at a much quicker rate, which confuses people a lot more. So you can chase a survivor for a little bit, make them think that you're still chasing them, and then suddenly they lose you and you're back to building traps and building your web, which is what you should be doing. And on top of that, because you're a killer that doesn't typically run a survivor for very long, but instead chases very quickly and hits traps and is then finished, you will mostly be having a smaller terror radius, and the downside of having a bigger terror radius doesn't really come into play. So Monitor and Abuse and Nurse's Calling, along with Sloppy Butcher or some of these other perks I mentioned, would be a very safe pick. However, you'll notice that for the final 4th perk, I recommend Hex No One Escapes Death. This is not a perk that I particularly find fun or fair, and it's not a perk that I actually recommend on almost any other killer. Many other killers have powers that make Noid unnecessary. Many other killers have innate weaknesses that makes Noid predictable. If you play Noid on a certain killer, it will just force survivors to open the gates and leave instead of coming for the rescue. But I think there are a few things that make Noid particularly powerful on hack and particularly appealing and particularly nasty. Number one, the hack doesn't need a lot of perks, so the other 3 perks that I recommend or that you could come up with can already make a very strong build by themselves. So you will literally have Noid as a backup. That means that with your 3 other perks, you have a very, very good chance of winning the game right there and then. But if that doesn't go according to plan, Noid can give you a ridiculously good chance to come back, even against strong survivors, even against survivors in very difficult maps, even if all of those things happen at once. So why Noid on hack? By the end of the game, there will be fewer pallets. Having the extra movement speed from Noid can actually help you to catch up to survivors that are just holding forward in a very desperate final scenario. The ability to insta-down on hack is incredibly powerful, especially if you have Noid and you know in advance to trap exit gates. If you run add-ons to help you teleport from further, and with Noid you probably should, they are very good add-ons, some of our best in any case. This is disgusting. You can trap exit gates early, you can trap choke points leading to exit gates early, and a team that is mostly well put together and well poised to win the game can suddenly lose one person, and the last person you can use the speed to catch up and quickly eliminate. So as a backup perk, I think Hex No One Escapes Death is a very, very nasty choice. However, if you feel confident in your other perks, consider running one of the many ones that we listed, and maybe even experimenting with others, because there's still many other perks out there that the hack can use okay. And of course, keep in mind that some of your add-ons will probably make certain perks more or less appealing. But that's it for the hack. It's time to see the Doctor, and with Doctor we actually have a very wide range of choices. Unlike some other killers such as Huntress, he actually has crazy good synergies with some of the strongest perks in the game, and even some of the off-meta, not so popular perks. Stealth perks can work okay on him, aggressive perks can work okay on him, even skill check related perks, which are typically not very good or consistent, can be alright on him. And combine that with the many transformative strong add-ons that he brings, you can actually have many different builds that could work quite well on average. But that probably wouldn't be the most consistent or powerful when you go against decent survivors that are not so easy to fool. For that reason, talking about the strongest build, I will recommend to you the patented aggressive M1 build. Full disclosure, I am attached to this build because it's the one that I used to get 50 wins in a row with him, although I will be giving you several alternatives. So this build consists of Discordance, Save the Best for Last, Search, and Pop. Now, Discordance does give you information at the start of the game where 2 or maybe all survivors will be, so that you can go there and immediately blast them. It works a bit similar like Whispers. Some people like to run Whispers on Doctor. When it turns on, you know more or less that there's going to be people. If no one screams, you know you have to search lockers. You have a similar idea with Discordance, except it will help you throughout the match a lot more, and it will constantly be pointing you towards 2 or more survivors. And when you find 2 or more survivors, not only are you pressuring them, not only are you gonna threaten to use Search and Pop in agenda working, you also find at least one survivor that is not the obsession. And this is where Save the Best for Last or next perk comes in handy. With the Doctor, you have Discordance and your own ability to make survivors scream, to constantly find survivors that are not the obsession. You completely ignore the obsession with this build and instead build up the Save the Best for Last stacks. When you do that, escaping you becomes harder and harder. The areas where the pallets are gone are now death traps. One hit, you catch up. Maybe they make it to a pallet, but you shock them before they can make it, and then down very quickly. Doctor also has some really good synergies with Save the Best for Last, where you can shock a survivor in a place where they get locked in, hit them, and before they can even vault the pallet that's dropped or the window, you can grab them. So it's a good perk on M1 killers, particularly great on Doctor. It ups his lethality, and it's a very consistent perk. It's not related to hexes or anything like that can go wrong, as long as you keep your obsession on the sidelines and they don't come in to take many hits. So this works tremendously well. Obviously, the more you down survivors, the more you'll use Search or Jolt, as it will be called soon, and you will see the generators around you be damaged. If they're not damaged, then you know that you should probably ignore them because they're not being worked on, and you'll go elsewhere. And this alone can already keep the game afloat. However, you still have Pop Goes the Weasel for the situations where a generator is damaged, but they are insistent on it and the generator has some progress. Then you go and pop it. But you only do that when it's really, really necessary. And then when the game now has 3 or 2 survivors left, then you can worry about hitting the obsession and getting them killed. With the ability to find survivors, slow them down a little bit, increase your chasing potential, but say the best for last, this build works out super, super well. And I think it's also... it also works out quite well regardless of the map or what you're up against. If you have survivors with several medkits, then Say the Best for Last will help you out. For sure, if you have survivors with several toolboxes, Discordant will probably point you towards them at the start. So it's a build that I think is quite versatile that should save you quite a bit. That being said, if this is not your cup of tea, Doctor has several other options. Perhaps the most safe and predictable one would be replace Discordance with Corrupt Intervention, and then we have the combination of Thrill and Tremors and Pop, along with a 4th perk that we'll get into. Thrill and Tremors and Pop are very, very good on Doctor. Remember, when you put a survivor in Madness tier 3, one way or another, they cannot touch generators. And if you blast them, they also cannot touch the generators for a little bit. So what you can do is literally down a survivor, blast with your power, and then immediately pick up afterwards. And if someone was working on a generator, they'll need to let go of it. And during that time, Thrill and Tremors will block it. So Thrill and Tremors not only will give you information, it will also give you very powerful stall so that you can go, hook, then come to the generator and pop it, even if the generator was about to be done. All of that, of course, on top of the abilities that you get from tier 3 with or without add-ons. And then your 4th perk here can be either Search or the newer perk Eruption. And both of them work really, really good. With Search, you can forget about Puff for a little bit and be a bit more aggressive if you need to. Also, don't forget that if they touch a generator after Search or Jolt, you can pop it immediately. But Eruption is also really, really mean. You can kick a generator, have someone work on it, then you down somebody else, that person screams, they cannot touch the generator, physically cannot touch it because they're incapacitated, and then you pick up and the generator is thrilled. For you to come back there later with Pop to deal with it. This is pretty good, and I would recommend it, and it's a very, very safe option as well if you are not a fan of Say the Best for Last in the previous build. Then again, if you want to go even further, you can run perks on Doctor to slow down gens and to slow down the game and to give you a boost near the end and not have to really worry about kicking gens or having any big plan. If you want to go a simpler route, Corrupt Intervention with either Ruin, which is passive but can be destroyed and very strong, or Deadlock, which is passive and cannot be destroyed even though it's not as powerful. Either of these perks to slow down gens without you doing anything, and then the combination of No One Escapes Death and the No Way Out perk from Trickster. These 2 perks are really, really nice. Near the end, you have gotten rid of a lot of pallets. Maybe their madness is close to tier 3, so they can't do certain things. They're gonna go for the gates. They cannot open them quickly, but you can find them with your power and down them in 1 hit with no hit. This is a very, very safe build to run. If you expect the game to go south, you can begin to camp the last 1 or 2 hooks. You will still slow them down thanks to your initial Corrupt and your Deadlock or Ruin. And you can still do a great comeback near the end. So things like this work. Then again, you could also just stack on Hex perks. If you have Haunt the Ground, Devour Hope, Ruin, all of these perks work well individually and together. Anything that gives them an insta-down, since you can naturally track survivors, is great. Of course, these are more unpredictable. Same with builds including things like Oppression and Overcharge or Lullaby, all of which make skill checks more difficult. These builds can absolutely work on Doctor. They will just be a little bit less consistent, depending on which survivors you're up against. But that being said, feel free to experiment on Doctor, no pun intended, and give a shot to these builds if you haven't before. I think they'll serve you well. moving on to the Cannibal, we find a killer with very few but also very notable strengths. He can insta-down any survivor if they are caught in the open. In fact, he can threaten to hit multiple survivors at a time, making unhooking and scenarios where he can defend an area against multiple survivors very, very difficult for them. And of course, he can also shred through pallets and breakable walls much faster than the average killer. This alone makes him quite the powerhouse, and it often comes down to seeing how the Cannibal navigates around his weaknesses. Now, what are his weaknesses? If you use windows very, very efficiently and pallets very, very efficiently and do not give him a down, he has a hard time downing you, and thus he has a hard time pressuring other survivors as long as you don't all group up in one area. So spreading out against Cannibal and being smart in chase can be so devastating against him. That's why you're going to run this bad boy of a build. With Corrupt Intervention, you're forcing survivors to now not spread on 7, but instead concentrate on 4 generators, and you're going to do your best to be close to all of them at once and bother as many survivors at once as possible. If these survivors are very good at using windows, great. You bring Bamboozle, which is an insurance perk that allows you to consistently get pallets out of the way very, very fast, and completely negate windows preemptively. If you identify that a survivor is trying to use shack window, for example, you can just use Bamboozle preemptively and force that survivor to go elsewhere or to drop the shack pallet much earlier than he would have otherwise, or they would have otherwise. And that covers for your basic weaknesses. And on top of that, we have Ruin and Pop, which are the best 2 perks that money can buy when it comes to keeping gens under control. Quite the overkill build, but this works best on basically any combination of add-ons you can think of, and it's very, very reliable and covers for most of your weaknesses. That being said, if you want to go for a simpler, if you want to drop Bamboozle and go for a simpler information build, the very, very basic ultra regression build that we talked about earlier is very, very good still. You have Discordance, Tinkerer, Ruin, and Undying, or Ruin and Pop. And this is also really great. With Tinkerer, you can catch survivors off guard if they're not super on point. And the information that this gives you pretty much keeps you going from start to finish, always knowing what to do and always knowing what is best. But do not be fooled. None of these perks are set in stone. If you think that 2 game slowdown perks are overkill, you could commit to just running Pop Goes the Weasel and instead replace one of those perks with something else to give you a bit of information, like Barbecue and Chili, for example. And there's also a lot of strength to be had in playing very defensively and even outright camping with Cannibal. If you want a build that explores this to a scary degree, I recommend Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, Lethal Pursuer, and No Way Out. The idea, of course, being that with Corrupt Intervention, they will only have 4 generators to work in. You will passively be slowing them down. Deadlock will make each generator completed block the other generator that is most advanced, slowing them down further while you do your business. With Lethal Pursuer, you will most certainly find someone that is not in a great position and try to get the first down as quickly as possible. And from there on out, you could legitimately just camp a lot. And if you get a couple hooks with No Way Out, you can basically guarantee someone dying on the hook and then still have additional kills near the end if they make it that far. So pick any or all of these perks if you want to satisfy that kind of gameplay. But then again, Cannibal, the fact that he has an insta makes information perks and stealth perks very good on him. You can definitely straight off meta and run things like Trail of Torment, Tinkerer, Monitor and Abuse. Anything that messes with your terror radius is fun and somewhat effective on him. So if you want to steer away from some of these ultra regression heavy builds, feel free to experiment. I think you'll have a lot of fun with them. Arriving at the Cannibal, aka Freddy, we have a killer that has several abilities going on for him, but his real strength, especially after the changes to his add-ons and his base kit, his real strength is his ability to just focus on one generator, teleport to it, and pressure it with strong generator perks. I would say that's his main gimmick, and taking him away from that typically results in worse and worse results, as he is a bit mediocre in everything else he does. However, With a build like this, it can actually perform quite well and be quite the nuisance. We're running Corrupt Intervention, which is a very good and generic perk to run on any killer, but it is particularly good on Freddy. Even though this perk stops doing anything after 2 minutes, during those 2 minutes you are forcing survivors to waste a little bit of time to go around the map, to maybe even try to search for totems, chests, do any side objectives, or be interrupted by you, and that will buy you time to make them all fall asleep. Once all the survivors are asleep, anyone you chase will be affected by the snares or the pallets, whichever one you're running, and it will also make your teleport recharge quicker. So making everyone fall asleep as soon as possible with as little progress on gens as possible early on is obviously a really good thing. Despite the first chases potentially being a bit difficult, if you down someone in a timely manner, it's very possible that you only have to worry about 4 generators still, since the other 3 are blocked by Corrupt. And if they're nearby, you can very quickly address them and kick them with Pop. And if they're far, Tinkerer will let you know and you can teleport there. Once you teleport, you kick them with Pop. If I didn't have Corrupt, I probably would run Ruin for a similar reason. We want them to do as little gens as possible and we want them to waste time. And I would drop the idea of our last perk if I had Ruin. But assuming that you're running Corrupt, which is a very consistent perk, we teleport to a gen if need be and we pop it, stealing a lot of progress, making survivors fall asleep even more if they spend more and more time on gens, and so on and so forth. Rinse and repeat. This is the basic cycle of hook, teleport, pop, hook, teleport, pop, and hopefully the chases in between are as short as possible. With Eruption, which is a perk from the Nemesis, it's actually a lot more valuable to kick generators. Any generator that you kick with pop or without pop will turn yellow, and the next time you down someone, that generator will lose a little bit of progress. And if someone were to be working on that generator, they will scream, revealing their location, and also become incapacitated for 16 seconds. This is huge. With information from Tinkerer and Eruption, you can actually be 100% confident that you can go to a generator and be able to pop it before they finish it, even if they are very adamant about doing that. So downing a survivor, picking them up, put them in the hook, you know for a fact that if you hit someone with Eruption, that person will be able to help on that generator and you might be able to teleport there in time and pop it. So buying you that little bit of time where they are useless and they cannot do gens, it's so good. It also obviously buys more and more time for them to fall asleep, which obviously is good, because it will mean that you teleport and you use your abilities better. So I think Eruption is a really good choice. If I were to drop Eruption, that would be completely okay. If you're not gonna use Eruption, another alternative that you can run instead of Tinkerer is Barbecue and Chili, or Thrilling Tremors, both of which are also very good at finding survivors in the open and finding survivors on generators. Thrilling Tremors conflicts with Eruption. The information they both give is a bit conflicting, so I wouldn't run Thrilling Tremors and Eruption. But they, if you don't run them together, they are both excellent options. If you're gonna run Tinkerer, Barbecue, Thrilling Tremors, and you're gonna forego the idea of Eruption, a nice fourth perk that you could bring could be something to help you end your chases faster. With Corrupt Intervention, survivors will be more likely to run around the map and find totems, so Haunted Ground could give you a bit of a boost early on if you're into that risk. Save the Best for Last is also a really nice perk. As a killer that's going to slow down survivors, that's going to teleport across the map, that's going to be hitting survivors a lot with your power. It's actually a pretty decent idea to hit them and then recover faster with Save the Best for Last. Obviously, if you come across an Obsession, you will lose stacks, but if you're incredibly big brain, you could slow them down on a window and then try to go for a grab. There are some things you can do as Freddy to try to force a grab to make Save the Best for Last not lose stacks against the Obsession as often as some other killers. So Save the Best for Last, I think, is a decent choice that will help quite a lot. If you want to add another layer of protection to your generators without running Eruption, Surge is also a very decent idea. And with that, that's basically what you will want to run on Freddy. Other options are available, but almost all of them revolve around generators. And are basically boiling down to what I just told you. If you try to have a build on Freddy that's all about information or chase, you'll find that generators are hard to stop early on and late game. Don't forget that late game you do not have the ability to teleport anymore, so perks like Know It could work, but also could backfire a lot. You could down a person and then just be reduced to camping that person while everybody else opens the gates across the map. So be picky and understand your strengths, play into them, and you'll do a lot better with Ready. And just like that, we arrive at the pig and her best build. I like this build because it's very easy to build upon or build down from, so I'm gonna try to go through it and explain what's the reason behind everything. You are a slow killer that doesn't have a lot of mobility. You do need a down to begin to use your power for slowdown and everything else, so Corrupt Intervention is an easy choice to push people towards you and give you a chance to catch them off guard. There are alternatives. This is assuming that you don't want to use your stealth very much, which I think is the best choice because her stealth is rather slow and not very reliable. You could run Discordance for a similar amount of information and effect at the start, and then you could use your stealth. You could even run Lethal Pursuer if you really want to catch someone off guard at the start, but it is so easy to outplay the pig's stealth with Sprint Burst, with a good use of Spine Chill, and she's so slow that I think it's honestly too risky. It's better to just get into your first chase as soon as possible and delay the survivors as much as you can before that first reverse bear trap is placed. Next up is Pop, which should probably be your staple. With one survivor on and off constantly busy with searching boxes, you will have a much easier time than other killers, especially near the mid and end game, to pop those shins and keep fighting for them. If the survivors are smart and they try to 99 some of the generators, that's a strategy that you can shut down very, very quickly if they ever try to do that. So these two perks you can probably keep as two core components of your build, and then from there we could switch it up. Now, adding Ruin on top of Pop is a little bit overkill. I think overall it's worth it, but if you find that having Ruin and then relying on Pop once Ruin is gone is not your style, you could totally switch this for some other slowdown perk or some other information or utility perk. I'm a big fan of Barbecue and Chili in this spot. Barbecue and Chili obviously tells you about people that are far, people that might be going to a totem, people that might be going to a corner to heal, people that might be going from and to your reverse bear trap jigsaw box searches. That tells you a lot of information. You can decide to act on it or you can decide to pass on it and just keep it in mind for what you do next. So Barbecue and Chill, I think, works out pretty damn well. Other alternatives, you could have Tinkerer. The removal of the turret radius from Tinkerer is a bit awkward considering you're already a stealth killer, but the information alone is very, very good. Will make Pop a lot easier to land if that's not something you mind. Other alternatives to slow down the game, believe it or not, Hex Plaything is an attractive choice to make people overwhelmed with side objectives. They need to do totems, they need to remove their bosses, they need to heal, but they also need to mine you. And it also encourages you to be active around the map and have them be careful and not necessarily rely on your stealth, which, as we said, is a little bit underwhelming. I also don't think it's even a bad idea to bring No Way Out. If a survivor is about to die near the end of the game, you can confirm the kill, you can make that final reverse bear trap search very difficult and still have a good chance to catch someone else if the game hasn't gone super well. As for the final perk, I do think the pig's lethality is one of her biggest downsides. She doesn't really have a way to insta down or do anything crazy, even with her best add-ons, really, unless you get lucky and one of your survivors dies through their timer. So for that reason, Save the Vessel Last fits in really, really well. You don't use your ambush as much as you possibly could. Instead, you'd rely on M1s. Maybe use your ambush a little bit more on the Obsession if you're forced to. And then it's good on its own right by virtue of you being an M1 killer that needs to hit, but it's also good on Pig in particular, because Pig can take advantage of situations where you hit a survivor, you quickly interrupt another survivor in a box, then you hit them as well, then you go back to the first one, put a trap on them, and so on. So these hectic situations, Save the Best for Last is really good at. And the late game situations where survivors need to do desperate moves like unhook someone else and so on, this perk carries hard. That being said, you might not be a fan of this perk, and that is completely okay. If you want to use your ambush more because you brought add-ons for that, you might instead replace this perk by for one of the other perks we mentioned earlier, and all of them would fit this just fine, in my opinion. And with that, you have a solid idea of what a build on the pig could be. That being said, if your traps actually succeed in slowing down the game, you can get away with a lot. You can bring chase perks, you can bring only info perks, you can bring many stacked hex perks on top of one on top of each other, and it's effective. So there's definitely a lot of different routes that you can take with Pig. I believe this one, however, is possibly the most consistent, all things considered. And next up is our boy the Clown. He has received several updates, quality of life changes, and an even powerful rework that gives him a second type of bottle. But all in all, he still has one strong ability and several lackluster aspects to his kit. He doesn't have any crazy mobility. Some add-ons can help a bit. He doesn't have any crazy lethality, unless you bring the pinky finger. He doesn't really have any crazy ability to track, unless you have the cigar box. He's pretty lackluster for the most part, and he really relies on his perks and a bit on his add-ons to help fill the gaps. For that reason, you need to bring the perks that help in the one thing that he is good at. And the one thing that he is good at is getting quick hits on survivors if they're in the open or if they're in a weak structure. If they're in a strong structure, then they'll need to play really well around windows, impossibly well around windows if he's good, or drop pallets very quickly. So he needs to be ready for this, and he needs to take advantage of this one strength. For that reason, I recommend this powerhouse of a fully nuclear build that is all dependent on you being very good at doing that. The first two perks are Devour Hope and Haunted Ground. Now, these two perks by themselves can largely backfire. If Devour Hope is found too early, then it's a perk that doesn't really do much. It only wastes their time a little bit. But if not, then it becomes really powerful. It gives you a speed boost that you can stack on top of your natural slowdown of survivors and speed up of yourself with your bottles for a few seconds anyway. It gives you the ability to insta-down, which is huge on Clown, and the threat of mooring survivors, so they really need to find it. And then next we have Haunted Ground, which also gives you the ability to insta-down, which can really transform your early game from a difficult first chase to an immediate first chase and great pressure. So Haunted Ground is super good, and a really smart Clown can look at a situation and realize very quickly, if I use my bottles here, this is a guaranteed hit, unless the survivor drops some really strong pallets and gets them out of the way super fast, in which case, that's not a bad thing. Now, the problem with Haunted Ground is that if you run it by itself, it's possible that survivors could just completely ignore these two totems, and they might do nothing for you the whole game. But with Devour Hope, they can't ignore all the totems, so they'll need to get lucky. And to remove some of that luck, we have Hex Undying. Hex Undying will protect the first totem that gets cleansed, either itself or one of the other two. So that means that to get rid of Devour Hope, survivors will need to cleanse at least two totems. And if in doing that they get a bit unlucky, they'll cleanse Devour, giving you the 60 seconds of insta-down. Forgive me, Haunted, giving you the 60 seconds of insta-down. In fact, with Undying, Haunted Ground can be triggered twice, which is really strong and will happen more often than you think. So you could have situations where they cleanse Haunted, Undying dies to protect it, then they cleanse the new renewed Haunted, giving you another minute, and they still haven't gotten to your Devour, and now you're starting to stack up and become really powerful. Notice that our final perk is Surge. Surge gives you a bit of information anytime you down someone. Any generators around you, if they are being worked on, will make this perk trigger, letting you know that they are indeed being worked on. And obviously, it will help you to keep the gens at bay. It will be a little bit hard, I'm not gonna lie, to make this perk work in large maps, but hopefully that's maps where survivors will struggle to find totems. That is a little bit of the weakness of this build. That being said, Surge is really good, especially in the mid game if you're starting to insta-down survivors, and now they have to worry about touching the gens that you search, but also finding the totems, but also not being caught and getting worried. So it works really well in this mega aggressive Hex insta-down build. That is the one that I think I use for the 50 wins, if you're wondering. So very solid build. Alternatively, another build that works incredibly well on Clown is the Doctor build that we talked about earlier, the aggressive Save the Best for Last build. Now, this one works a little bit different. You have, it's basically, it works for different reasons, but in a very similar style to Doctor. You have Discordance to help you find multiple survivors and pressure multiple at a time, so that you can find one of them that's not your obsession. And then with Save the Best for Last, you're going to massively harass survivors back and forth, but ignore your obsession. With Save the Best for Last, it's basically like having a lethality increase that's similar to an insta-down. You hit a survivor, but they cannot make it across the map. They only make a little bit of distance and catch up with bottles even faster. And if they don't make it to a good and safe location, they will go down very, very quickly. So it works out super well. Anytime you're down a survivor, Search will be there to let you know what's going on you and help you slow down the gens. And then on top of that, you have Pop. In case a generator is being particularly tough to defend, you can always spend the time to pop it. And this build works really, really, really well. Now, if you run a more vanilla build on Clown, something that's like a little bit of slowdown, a little bit of information, a little bit of, say, Sloppy Butcher healing, that can be okay. But I found that from my experience, unless you have really strong add-ons to back that up, it can be very, very tough for his mediocre base kit sometimes to carry you. So in my modest opinion, use one of these very, very heavy hitting builds for best chances of success. That being said, Clown is all about having fun. So if you are going to bring some add-ons and you make a build tailored around them, that makes complete sense. So by all means, keep your add-ons in mind. And don't forget that the Clown comes with some really useful and strong perks by default. So if you don't have a lot of perks, don't be afraid to play him. He's still very, very fun and pretty damn good. Anyway, moving on. It's time for the Spirit, and with the Spirit, we've had a significant amount of changes over the last few months and a big rework to her ability coming up. She will still be a powerhouse, she will still be a strong killer, some of her best add-ons are still very much there. However, there are a few perks that used to be a good idea that I would advise against, or at least warn against, going forward. Let's talk about some of them briefly before we get into her best build. Strider. Strider used to be able to make people, even with Iron Will, a very popular perk, make noise when injured. It doesn't work like that anymore, and as such, it's a mediocre perk and no longer helps the Spirit where she needs it in chase. Strider, probably not a good pick anymore. Thrill of the Hunt is a somewhat popular pick for Spirit people that want to defend totems like Devour Hope. But going forward, apparently this perk will no longer give a notification when a totem is being worked on. So this is also a perk I would retire from my repertoire. And then we have anti-healing perks such as Sloppy Butcher and Nurse's Calling. These perks are good on Spirit because being injured against her is typically bad. But in the current meta that we're about to get our hands in, with Shadow Step, Boon Totem that hides auras, and Circle of Healing, Boon Totem that makes healing very fast, I feel like these two perks will probably also be slightly underwhelming. So just fall back to the classic strong meta perks. This is the build I would recommend. Corrupt, slowdown. Ruin, slowdown. Undying, slowdown. Haunted Grounds, F you, you're gonna die. With Haunted Grounds, Undying, and Ruin, you have this obnoxious grip on generators from the start, and totems are actually quite dangerous to do. You have the ability to trigger Haunted, which is devastating on Spirit, and you could potentially trigger it twice. At the very least, survivors will need to do 2 totems to get rid of Ruin, and if they're lucky, that will be it. If they're not lucky, they could trigger Haunted Ground. Placing a Devour Hope instead is also an interesting idea, Devour Hope being really, really strong on Spirit. So the threat of Devour might also make them destroy Haunted Ground even after getting rid of Ruin and Undying. And this is just a very, very nasty build that takes advantage of your ability to down people quick, use your basic attack to insta-down, and control gens a lot. That being said, there's not a lot of information perks, so if you are struggling, you might want to retire one of these perks and replace it for something that points you towards the right direction, like Surveillance instead of Haunted Ground, for example, or Tinker or Barbecue. And if you're not into Hex perks as being staple parts of your build, you could also switch it out for something a bit more common, such as Corrupt, Pop, Barbecue, or your choice of information perks, and some other utility perk. You could go with No Way Out, very reliable. If you see a lot of items, you could also bring Franklin's Demise, which would be a fantastic pick to slap medkits, keys, toolboxes, and whatever out of survivors' hands. Or if you just want to be chaotic evil, go with Hex, No One Escapes Death, Noed, which is also really strong on her. And with that, you have a build that will make you happy and the survivors extremely unhappy. That being said, there are some choices now that were not very attractive then that you might want to incorporate. Her terror radius now is a little bit quieter, so running Monitor and Abuse is probably more worth it now than before. Especially considering how her facing sound is now working differently. And she does have many add-ons to recharge her power after being stunned by pallets or after breaking breakable walls. You might want to consider running Brutal Strength now, since survivors will be a little bit more trigger happy on the pallets than before. Even though this perk is not mega strong or anything like it, it is a bit more of an attractive pick. So do adapt to the changes, get used to the new and old add-ons. Spirit is, you know, not going anywhere. And just like that, we have reached the Legion. And with Legion, you have a lot of strong perks that get a lot of value with their power. Some even off-meta perks that are very decent on them, but also a couple picks that I would not recommend. Basically, Legion is a killer that can easily get people injured, that can easily track survivors once you find one of them, all of which is really good. But his weakness, or their weakness, is the fact that once people are injured, his M1 game is very basic. You might decide to bring some perks to help you here and there, or you might decide to just slow down the game massively to help you deal with it. I think slowing down the game massively is the most reliable. Although if you are playing against really high caliber survivors and you expect them to do really well, you might want to bring some tricks here and there. This is the build I would recommend. You have Ruin and Pop along with Surge. This is basically a bit overkill. Ruin and Pop are the two strongest regression perks in the game. On top of that, you have Surge. With Ruin, anytime you injure them and they need to mend, they are off gens. Anytime you harass them and they need to heal, you can quickly harass them off gen. Ruin is very powerful. If it is gone soon, you still have Pop. And anytime you down a survivor that's out of the injured, which will be all the time with Legion, Surge will give you information to let you know if you need to deliver a Pop. And because it's hard for them to just take a hit and go elsewhere if they're out of the injured, Surge becomes really strong in the end game. And with No Way Out, you have a way to maybe strategically set yourself up for a good end game, even if the survivors that you were up against played the mid and early game really well. So you have everybody injured and someone dead on hook, you camp them out, no problem. Now you have a chance to get the last 2 or 3 survivors with No Way Out. That is a consistent, good, decent build, but one that can definitely be modified. For instance, Ruin and Pop are quite overkill when it comes to slowdown. If you want to double down on Ruin, you could replace Pop with Undying if you don't want to kick gens at all. If you just want to double down on Pop, which is a wise decision because it's very consistent, instead of Ruin, you could bring another info perk, such as Barbecue and Chili, which would let you know where people are and where the gens are being done, or even better, Thrill and Tremors, which gives very accurate information, and it's very good in this build. Thrill and Tremors, Pop, Surge is a very good staple build. So that's an option. If you do not like Surge, even though I think it's very good, on bigger maps Surge can be a bit underwhelming. Brutal Strength is a nice option to help you kick gens faster, to get rid of pallets. I don't recommend Corrupt Intervention on Legion. I do think that it will force survivors to spread out and split up, which on Legion can set you up for a bad start. But I guess if you really dig it, you could always go for that. And then our final perk here is No Way Out, but there are so many other perks that you could replace No Way Out or Surge with. From the top of my head, if you want to just have a really silly turn your brain off build, put on Thanatophobia. Thanatophobia is not a perk I recommend on most killers because getting people injured at the start is very hard, but that's exactly what the Legion excels at. Get 2 or 3 people injured throughout the game, and Thana, on top of other slowdown perks, gets really annoying. Even more so if you have add-ons to keep them mending longer and so on. Some of the perks that are worth mentioning. Lethal Pursuer, I think, is a decent choice, as well as Discordance, to let you know where people are gathering up. Discordance is a bit predictable on Legion. Lethal Pursuer only gives you value at the start of the match, but it can set you up for a really good beginning where you find someone out of position. Other perks that are cute. Enduring, I think, is very valuable for a beginner Legion that doesn't know when to respect pallets. You can, especially against beginner survivors, can be really, really strong. You get stunned out of a pallet, out of your power, and it cuts on your animation by a lot, which is awesome. I even think Coup de Grace has some merit in this build. Every time you lose a gen, you'll get a stack, and you only use stacks on people that are already injured. You don't lose them with your Feral Frenzy Slash. So Coup de Grace can actually get you downs and get you mid-game hooks that you would normally never get if survivors are smart and use their dead hearts well and whatnot. And even perks like Ammo Ears that give you a chance to mind game an otherwise unmind gameable loop are very, very cute options. You keep all of that in mind and find the one combination that works best for you, and you'll be mostly fine with Legion. You'll find that they are quite adequate. Again, think about what it is you need the most. Are you struggling the 1v1? Then maybe Amaliers or the cheeky play with your food can help you out. Are you struggling with the early game? Lethal Pursuer or Discordance can help you out. Is it generator information that you're lacking? Throw Tremors and so on can help you out. So focus what it is that you seem to be lacking on Legion, and you can really tailor a build around your needs and have a lot of success with them. But before we move on, one final consideration that I neglected to mention, and that is Blood Favor. In the upcoming PTB, Blood Favor triggers with special attacks and has a range of 32 meters with no cooldown. I don't think this perk will go to live with such parameters. I'm pretty sure they'll bring it down to 24 meters or something like that. I'm almost certain, just judging by the strength of it. But if by some chance it doesn't, it actually does become a really appealing perk on Legion. If you run double recovery, Cold Dirt, and Joey's mixtape, you can actually stab a survivor, chase after them a little bit, and they literally have no pallets. By the time you're out of your frenzy cooldown, you can down them very easily. Add on top of that Ruin and Undying to make the totems last a little bit longer and have some regression, and with Bamboozle or even Crowd Control, and you control pallets and windows with your power. Obviously, they're hex totems, they can be cleansed, but until that happens, Legion is very, very scary. If this perk goes live with such parameters, it might be worth running on Legion for this ultra aggressive, very specific build with add-ons in mind. Arriving at the new and refurbished Plague, we actually have so many options that it's hard to recommend just a single build. I'm going to try to focus on the one or two that I think are best. It really comes down to whether you want to use your puke, your red puke, very aggressively, which is going to be the idea behind this first build, or whether you want to infect generators and play more defensively. Personally, I think the aggressive approach is best. This is the build that I used to get God knows how many wins in a row. And it has a very simple idea. With Discordance, you know where multiple survivors are at the start, and if possible, you use your red puke from the get-go, at least the one default fountain, and play very, very, very aggressively. If not, you just get them infected and look to do that as soon as possible. With Ruin and Dying, you have a very, very long-lasting totem that is incredibly hard to play around as long as it's up. The generators are very hard to defend if you keep drinking up from your red fountains, because you have such a powerful presence and survivors can go down so quickly around you that they really have to respect you. This often doesn't get talked about very much, but the Plague is also high up there with Cannibal in terms of defending hooks. Especially with her red puke, she can make it basically impossible to make safe rescues, so she's very, very good at defending. And we have a final fourth perk that's a bit of an unusual one in the form of Retribution. And Retribution is incredible. Obviously, if they ignore totems, your power is very, very, very strong if used correctly. But if they do go through totems, they'll have to at least get rid of Undying and then Ruin, at least to get rid of your Ruin. So that means that at least twice you will have Retribution showing you where everyone is for now 15 seconds. This is super, super good. If you do not know where survivors are, it helps you get into a chase. If you are in a chase, for this killer, seeing the auras is actually quite powerful, because you can ready up pukes around walls and hit over obstacles and catch survivors in all kinds of awkward places. so they can go down in seconds and you can make the most. And if you don't have your red puke available, you can very quickly identify which survivors can easily be puked on, so that you can get them infected and then focus on the others and eventually get more and more people cleansing. It is a very, very dirty choice. Now, this build has a lot of modularity to it. There's a lot of things that you can switch out. For example, if you don't really care about the mid-game information and you want to bank it all on that first few, on those first few minutes and first few chases with the red puke, especially if you're going to use the Apple add-ons, you could totally switch out Discordance for Lethal Pursuer. And with Lethal Pursuer, you can very fast see where everybody is, see if one of your fountains with apples, it's very likely, is on the way, and start wrecking havoc from the get-go. Ruin and Dying should honestly stay. I think these two perks are too good, but the Act of Retribution, giving you information, can be replaced very, very easily. Barbecue and Chili can be a fine perk here, as well as Infectious Fright, if you're into that, can work if you want to snowball. But this build is an absolute beast, and I highly, highly recommend it. That being said, if your playstyle revolves more around defending generators, now with her extended infection time and with her increased infection rate when survivors work on infected objects, this style is even more viable on Plague than before. If you're gonna go that route, I highly recommend Corrupt, her own perk, and Pop. The idea, of course, is that during the first 2 minutes, there's only 4 generators. You're going to infect all of them, and it will be very, very hard for survivors to outstall you. And with Pop, you will constantly have the threat of making a generator lose 20 seconds worth of progress, and if a survivor gets back on that generator for another 20 seconds, they will literally be already fully infected by the end of that, as long as the generator itself is infected. So these two perks go really, really well. On top of that, we will be running Tinkerer, ideally, to control gens, although Thrilling Tremors and Barbecue and Chili would be perfectly fine replacements. But Tinkerer, however, is probably the meanest. And I really, really like Eruption with thrown into the mix. With Eruption, every time you kick a generator with Pop, anytime someone works on it, they will now scream, and it will be a lot of dead time and information that you get, and it will be very, very hard to contest those final gens against a killer that can make you injured, that can make you incapacitated, and considering that every time you touch a generator, you also infect it, you touch an uninfected survivor, you also infect them, that little bit of extra time really comes in handy. Although, if you're very, very mean, you could drop the idea of Eruption and just put on Ruin, and have Ruin and Pop as a plan A, plan B of sorts, which is still very disgusting. If you want to practice your ability to down survivors very quickly, Bamboozle is actually not a crazy idea. If you can typically play around most standard palettes. The ones in the jungle gyms are hard, you get those out of the way, and any windows you quickly preemptively shut down with this perk. And I think with that you have a lot of different things to explore. That being said, many other perks that are worth running on Plague. Amaliers is one of my personal favorites. You could fit it as a 4th perk in almost any build. Many people will tell you that you should run Thanatophobia to trick survivors into cleansing. I don't think this is terribly effective. Any of the perks I've told you will do more and be more impactful and let you use your red puke more. But if it does fool survivors into cleansing, I guess it could be useful. I say you don't need to fool them into cleansing. You just bring 1 apple and you already have 2 red fountains from the get-go, and your own ability to put them under pressure will force them to cleanse more than any perk would. With that out of the way, do not be afraid to experiment, because her add-ons offer a lot of mix-up potential. For example, if I was running the Iridescent Seal, which will give me my power when a generator is completed, I would certainly want to run that with Tinkerer. If I was running the Black Incense, which gives me information on the survivors, I would definitely not want to bring many information perks, and I would just focus on stalling the game. So think about your add-ons carefully before you select your perk loadout for best results on Plague. Alright, it's time for the Ghostface, and he's a bit of a strange cookie. On the one hand, he is a stalking, ambushing killer, and you don't necessarily want to run very straightforward chasing perks that are good on other killers on him. But then again, he does make some perks that are quite unusual picks on other killers, quite appealing when you run them on him. If I had to give you my best approximation to a good generic build, it would be this one. Now, Ghostface has, especially compared to other stealth killers, he has an enormous potential at the start of the game to find multiple survivors, stalk multiple of them, maybe get it down or set himself up for multiple downs down the line. I love this about Ghostface. You can run Whispers, which is a decent pick to try to pull this off. You can run Discordance to try to find people early. You can just run Corrupt by itself and hope they run into you and guess where they're going to be. And all of these things are fine. You could even run no perks and just try to have a very, very, very good guess of where survivors are going to be. But you always run the risk of guessing where 3 survivors are correctly, but then having the 4th survivor run into you prematurely, reveal you, and then force you to go into a chase early on, or force your location to be known to everyone else if they're in a communicated group. And this is bad. That's why I think running both Corrupt Intervention and Lethal Pursuer is a tremendously successful idea for the early game. With Corrupt, you will be pushing survivors towards you, you will see them with Lethal Pursuer, and you will be able to pick which 1 or 2 survivors or group of survivors you're gonna meet and where you're gonna meet them from. If they have Spine Chill, it's okay, you can always look sideways with the absolute certainty that they are where you saw them last, and then lean on them last second to even full Spine Chill. So I think these 2 perks are great for the early game and can set you up with a very, very successful chance to get a grab, to get an insta-down, and every other good thing that Ghostface is capable of. From there on out, you rely on 2 other very good perks to help you keep the game going. The first one is Pop Goes the Weasel. You will be getting downs every now and then. You go, you pop a gen. Very, very straightforward idea. And the other one is Nurses, a Nurse's Calling. This is not a perk I recommend lightly on Killer. Especially, I wouldn't recommend it in light of the new Boom Totem Shadow Step that can hide survivors' auras. But if you're not afraid of that, if you don't expect that, I think Nurses is really, really good on Ghostface. You are a stealth killer with normal mobility that can get very, very close. If a survivor is self-caring, you can down them. If you think they're about to fully heal, you can set up for a lean. If there are multiple survivors, you can set up for a lean, then down the injured survivor, then have the other one prepared and be insta-down for later. There's so many things that happen with Nurses. You can also slug and leave a survivor on the ground for a little bit, and if someone comes back, you can also lean them as they get up. There are just so many situations where this perk is great. It works really, really well on Ghostface. Additionally, I would say that running Surge instead of Pop, if you want to be more aggressive, or instead of Nurses, if you just want to defend gens, is also a great idea because you will be downing survivors often, and Surge allows you to save a bit of time around yourself. That being said, if I was going against a group of survivors that I knew were going to give me trouble and I didn't know which map I was going to go to and I wanted to be ready for the worst case scenario, you could bring more heavy artillery. I would keep the Corrupt, but I would work under the assumption that I'm going to be revealed and that the survivors are going to be very smart. So I would stack probably Ruin and Pop as a plan A, plan B sort of deal. Ruin works for as long as it's up, and when it's gone, you now have Pop for the mid to late game. If it goes really early, well, they still had to waste a little bit of time, so no big deal. And your final perk being Play with your food. Now, Play with your food is a deceivingly strong perk on this killer. If you manage to harass your obsession on and off, you will have people 99, you will have people fully marked, and unlike in many other instances, you will actually know that you can commit and get a hit. Now, if you're a good Ghostface, you will use your Shroud to remove your red light. You will crouch occasionally to be harder to spot. There are many, many tricks that Ghostfaces can pull in normal loops that are almost impossible with other taller, louder, brighter killers. But still, you're an M1 killer, a smart survivor that waits and pre-drops pallets will probably give you a hard time if you commit to a long chase. That's why Play with your food here can absolutely make a world of difference. You spend a little bit of time 99ing your obsession, getting a couple of stacks, and because you will presumably be insta-downing them, you do not lose 2 stacks to get 1 down. Instead, maybe you lose 1 stack to get it down, and if the obsession runs into you again, you get it back. and this gives you a constant tool to get downs in maps where typically you would have no chance to get downs if the survivors are playing smart. This is why I think it's a powerful perk, and the better the Ghostface, the better use for play with your food. Similarly, the better the survivors, the more you'll catch them off guard, because the more they'll think they know what you're capable of, and they'll be thrown off by that little extra bit of speed that you gain with this perk. So for that reason, this will be my heavy artillery. Notable mention to the build that I used for the 50 wins. It gave up on Corrupt Intervention. Actually, did it? Did we give up on Corrupt Intervention? Yeah, I believe we gave up on Corrupt Intervention. And it consisted of Discordance, Surge, Nurses. I've told you basically why all of these perks work. Instead of having Corrupt, you now have Discordance, which will let you know where two people are. Maybe all of them are at the start of the match and throughout. So that you can go bother them, and obviously if you get it down quickly, that can make Search more powerful. And the odd pick here is Devour Hope. Now this is a build that I recommend if you're not going to run any add-ons. Ghostface is going to get buffed very soon, and his recovery will be 24 seconds, but especially before that, Ghostface without add-ons is really tough. You start off with a really strong early game, you get a couple downs, and then the survivors, they stay injured or they wisen up and they start to act more carefully, and that mid to late game can be difficult. That is where Devour Hope absolutely kicks their ass. You stop caring about 99ing and handling survivors who are now a little bit smarter. You let them have a couple of hooks, and suddenly they have a really hard time dealing with the speed boost from Devour and the pressure that it gives. Even if you lose it early, it's still a pretty good build. A bit of a wild one, but one that I wanted to run by you and recommend. That being said, Ghostface. If you're going to play him a bit more of a hit and run, you might want to disregard some of the ideas I presented. You might just want to run Nurses, Corrupt, Sloppy, Barbecue, whatever. I do think you won't get the full potential out of him, but there's also many other gimmicky, unusual perks that work super well with him. Anything that regresses generators plus surveillance can work. Barbecue is a popular perk, but actually works quite well on him to catch people off guard and anticipate where they're going to come from. And also identify the people that are 99 so that you can catch them off guard, get them down, and so on. Coup de grace can be fun. There are probably a lot of other perks that are worth considering for your final 2 or 1 perks in whatever build you have going for you. So yeah, have a lot of fun with Ghostface, and let me know if you have any other ideas for his builds. Moving on to the Demogorgon, we have a killer that can actually run a variety of fun perks to some success, but that ultimately is best used with the average strong meta perks, and that's what I'm going to recommend to you. Corrupt Intervention, block away the further gens, force survivors to come closer towards you, limit the amount of generators to defend, set up a couple portals early on. Once you're in your first chase, you make that as short as humanly possible, and then use Ruin, which is your strong plan A, or Pop, which is your reliable plan B, along with the information from Tinkerer to harass the generators that need to be harassed. And with a few portals across the map, you can make it almost impossible for survivors to complete a generator without you at least being able to stop it in some way. Especially if your chases are short and you're using your add-ons to shred pallets quicker, to recover from your shred faster, and so on. Your add-ons do play a big role in what perks you bring, and we'll get to that. But assuming that you're bringing something average like that, this is probably the best, most reliable build, with a lot of, obviously, alternatives. If you want to go for a more conventional build, that would also work quite well. You could keep Corrupt for the same reason, and replace Ruin and Pop for just Pop. Maybe bring in Barbecue along. Barbecue will help you to know where to deliver the Pop, not as consistently as Tinkerer, but it will also allow you to find people in the open, and you'll be able to use spread out portals to catch people healing, catch people doing bones, catch people in basements doing God knows what. That kind of information of knowing where a survivor is when they're in a bad spot comes along with Barbecue, and Demogorgon can make use of it very effectively. And your final perk is Demogorgon Stable, which is Save the Best for Last. With Save the Best for Last, you can shred the Obsession to not lose stacks, and everyone else go for an M1 basic attack if possible. And eventually the stacks will go higher and higher and higher, and you will be a monster that can do basic attack, recover very quickly, and then shred. The problem with Save the Best for Last is that it somewhat conflicts with your shred add-ons if you choose to run those. Obviously, if you have faster recovery with your shred, it might be more desirable to just focus on using your shred rather than going for basic attacks. There's also the issue that against really good survivors, using your basic attack in the first place can be tricky. And if they run you well, it's very possible you might be forced to use shreds more often than not, which means that it will take a very long time to build that Save the Best for Last, and at that point, you might not want to run it in the first place. There's also add-ons like the Leprous Lichen, the Iridescent, that shows you the aura of everyone in the map when you emerge from a portal. And if you're going to run those add-ons, obviously, you can skip Barbecue, you can skip Tinkerer, you can skip Information Perks potentially, because you basically can use that add-on to feed you the information that you could, all the information that you could possibly need. So keeping those add-ons in mind, and some of the other fun combinations, this is probably the builds that you'll be looking at. What are some other perks that you could consider? No Way Out, always an excellent choice. If you want to practice your shreds, Amalier's is actually a surprisingly good perk on him. Seeing the auras of survivors around corners can allow you to pre-charge your shred and catch them, even if they just make the slightest misplay, which is very satisfying. And if you're gonna run the Life Whistle or some other comparable add-on to help you defend totems, I've always thought that Devour Hope is a very, very scary perk on him, since the Demogorgon is able to defend it passively with his portals. Those are maybe some other fun perks are what you're gonna be looking at for Demo, who's a very happy, loud boy. Moving on to the Oni, we have a killer with a very bloated set of abilities, many of which conflict with many utility perks that other killers can benefit from, but that Oni himself doesn't really need or use well. He's got a lot of mobility, he can shred through pallets very, very fast, he can insta-down survivors. In fact, insta-down perks are not good on him at all, because he doesn't get to harvest blood from insta-down perks. So you definitely want to injure a survivor first. And besides, when he goes into Blood Fury like this and switches to his Cannibal, all of the attacks from his Cannibal count as special attacks. So basic attack perks like Sloppy Butcher, Save the Best for Last are typically bad picks on him. That being said, the other good strong generic perks, which we're gonna run for sure, are still very, very good on their own right for Oni. The first one that we're gonna run on this best build is Corrupt Intervention. This will force multiple survivors to run from their spawn towards us typically, and give us a good chance to find one or two of them in a bad spot, maybe get a hit or two going, and have a choice of who to go for, who is most out of position, who can give us the earliest hit possible. If you get a down out of that, that's wonderful, but many times, even if you don't, that's still okay. There are only now 4 generators available, and if Tinkerer pops on one of them, as long as you can use your power, you can use your mobility to go from almost any point in the map towards that gen very, very fast, contest the gen, maybe even get it down in the process, and as long as Ruin is up, that gen will be very, very hard to do anywhere around you. Even if Ruin falls, and occasionally it will sooner than later, you still have Pop Goes the Weasel along with Tinkerer to let you know where to go to delay the gens. Where gens have been done will often be places where you'll also find blood, and you can keep the cycle of Blood Fury, down, unhook, now they're injured, they need to heal, they drop blood, you pick it up, Blood Fury, you can keep that cycle going and going and going. With Ruin and Pop, you do have the plan A, plan B sort of thing. You cannot use Pop as long as Ruin is up, but Ruin is so powerful in its own right that it does definitely pay off to have a plan A and a plan B, and Tinkerer will help you a lot in knowing when to activate your power. That being said, you could dumb down this build even more if you want to make fewer decisions and perhaps rely more on the information given to you by perks. You could drop down completely Corrupt for Discordance and Pop for Undying. Now, Ruin Undying will be harder to get rid of, and you won't have to worry about kicking gens for a very, very long time, potentially. And with Discordance and Tinkerer, you have beautiful, beautiful information across the map of which gens are being done and how long they'll take to be done. So if a Tinkerer pops, you know that you have a set amount of time typically a lot to get there and stop it. If Tinkerer and Discordance are both on at the same time, you know that by the time the effects of Tinkerer wear off, that gen is going to pop. So that lets you understand whether or not you should commit to go into that gen, whether or not you have time, or if you should focus for the next towards the next generator, for example. So that would be an alternative. This is just the basic ultra regression build that almost works on every killer. But there's also more unique builds that you could bring for the Oni himself that would also work. A popular one includes also Corrupt Intervention, alongside Infectious Fright, Barbecue and Chili, and the always reliable Pop Goes the Weasel. Corrupt does the same thing as we explained before, but with the addition of Infectious and Barbecue, we have a really interesting mechanic where if you down a survivor and there's people around you, Infectious will typically tell you. Now you can go for an extra hit if they're in a bad spot, or use your power and keep downing one after another. This is very effective if you have good add-ons to keep your power going. If you don't have any add-ons and your power runs out early, or if they have a lot of anti-slugging perks such as Unbreakable, We're Gonna Live Forever, Soul Guard, and so on, this can be risky, but still. And if there's no Infectious around you, typically that means that if you hook very fast, Barbecue will show you the people far away from you. People on gens, people in a bad spot that you could potentially down, people healing in a place where you could potentially go and pick up all of the blood orbs and get the cycle going again. And of course you got Pop to help you out. This is a very, very interesting one. If you're not a fan of Corrupt Intervention, another alternative here would be Monitor and Abuse. With Monitor and Abuse, you make Infectious and Barbecue better. At the start of the game, you go towards where you think the survivors are. With your smaller terror radius, you will maybe catch them off guard a little bit more, also throughout the match. Once you down someone in chase, Infectious will actually have a larger terror radius because Monitor makes it larger during chase. So it will make Infectious cover even more ground. Again, this is particularly good with add-ons. And if you see someone in a corner and you approach them after seeing them with Barbecue and Chili, Monitor will also give you a better chance to catch them off guard. So Monitor is a decent idea in this build, and it's a classic pick on Oni. And another perk that you don't see a lot, if you're gonna go for Pop Goes the Weasel, one of the perks that you could replace here instead of Monitor, even Barbecue or Infectious, is the perk Oppression. Now, Oppression has a very nasty, annoying cooldown that I really don't like, but it's pretty great. You don't have a lot of time, so kicking a gen, applying Pop, and kicking other gens across the map with Oppression is pretty nice. And if those gens blow up, now you know that there's a survivor there, and you can maybe use your power to contest that gen if necessary. So it also works as a bit of an information gathering tool at the start of the match if you're not sure where the gens are being done. So those are some of the perks that you could run. The Oni has a pretty good endgame. He definitely gets stronger as the game goes on. So replacing one of these perks, for example, Corrupt with No Way Out, is also never a bad idea, and it should give you consistent results. But from here on out, your options become thinner and thinner, and there's not that many perks that have good synergies with this power. If you know of any of them, and if you have any powerful build that I might have overlooked, I would love to know about it in the comments, definitely. So yeah, do let me know. Let's move on to the next one. Turn for the Deathslinger, and he is right now in the process of being reworked. After the contents of the PTB that we just played go live, the Deathslinger will have an increased terror radius of 24 to 32 meters, and he will not be able to instantly shoot his gun the way he can right now. Instead, he'll have to wait a minimum of 0.4 seconds. There's also a 1 second, I believe, cooldown, or half a second cooldown. I think it's 1 second after you stop aiming before you can hit immediately. But he is a little bit faster when he holds his gun, and he also recovers a little bit faster from breaking his chain. So keeping that in mind, what are the builds going to look like from now to the future with Slinger? Perks like Monitor and Abuse, which is a very good perk on Slinger right now, will probably fall out of grace because you no longer have a 60-meter terror radius or something obscene like that, where you can very, very quickly shoot a survivor the moment they start hearing your terror radius by even a little bit. Your terror radius is now normalized, so that whole gimmick will probably cease to happen. Instead, you might want to go for more reliable perks, and the build I would recommend consists of Discordance, to constantly find groups of survivors. Arguably, as good as this perk is, you could also replace it with Corrupt Intervention for a similar effect, but we'll go with Discordance. Then Ruin and Undying, very obvious slowdown choice for a killer that is not super fast, has to reload, and is good in the 1v1, doesn't necessarily have the time to kick gens. This might just be the better option. If you find Ruin and Undying to be unappealing and you want to have a plan B for the plan B, Search is also a really sweet perk that works very well on him. And works passively, gives you information on top of slowing down, on top of Ruin, and in place of Ruin, if Ruin is cleansed. And also it goes well with Insta-Down, which is our final 4th perk, Haunted Ground. With Haunted Ground, you have potential 1 minute of Insta-Downing anyone, which is quite scary with this killer. And if you run it with Undying, as I recommend, you will have the chance to trigger it twice. And 2 minutes of Insta-Down with a killer that is pretty good at loops is quite scary and should give you a bit of a boost. But of course, as a hex perk, it is not the most reliable thing in the world. A popular choice, a popular alternative choice for slingers is Save the Best for Last, which is not a hex perk, but does have its own risk. With Save the Best for Last, basically the idea is to use your power, hit people at the end of your chain as much as you possibly can. And when it comes to the Obsession, you try to break the chain, which is now a little bit faster, so that's nice, and only hit them once. And overall, you get more and more and more stacks, and what the stacks basically allow you to do is hit a survivor, reload, catch up to them quicker, or hit them, recover very fast, and then shoot them before they can make it to the next loop. And that is nasty. So a very, very good alternative there if you want to go for it. Now, with his larger terror radius, the alternative build that I would have suggested some time ago becomes even more appealing, because you don't need agitation anymore to make his terror radius larger. So this is the Starstruck build, which consists of Corrupt Intervention to worry only about 4 gens at the start and limit their options. Any of the following perks is good. In my opinion, Search is the best, but Pop or even Ruin could work in this place. And then Thrilling Tremors, Surveillance could also do the job, but we'll go with Thrilling Tremors and Starstruck. And the idea here is to find a survivor, chase them as quickly as you can, down them, pick them up, and with Thrilling Tremors you will see which generators have people on them. Then you walk towards there with your 32-meter terror radius, hook nearby, and now those people can be insta-down within the next 30 seconds. This, I reckon, will be a little bit stronger now that he has a big terror radius. But of course, your power is a little bit weaker than before, so exercise caution and keep your add-ons heavily in mind, because we will have add-ons for Deathslinger that allow him to recover even faster. We do have add-ons for Slinger that inflict effects, such as Mangled. We do have add-ons to increase his reload. There's an add-on, even the Iridescent, to insta-down. If you're going to run that, you might want to skip on the Tally perks. Perhaps if you're lucky and good, you can get insta-downs without Haunted Ground or Save the Best for Last. So he's one of those killers whose add-ons are probably impactful enough that you might want to organize your perks and arrange them around your choice of add-on. With that, however, you should have a decent idea of what to pick with him. And finally, we reach the Executioner, aka Pyramid Head. He doesn't get to use some of the hook-related perks to their full potential, namely Pop Goes the Weasel, Barbecue and Chili, and so on, because he doesn't always hook survivors. Sometimes it's best to just cage them where they stand to save a lot of time, but that still leaves you with a lot of useful and generic strong perks that work perfectly good on him. The typical Ultra Regression build that you see on screen right now is probably his best. You have Ruin and Undying. Hard to get rid of, but particularly so if the Pyramid Head torments and leaves a trail on the totem. If you have 1 or 2 totems left and you come across them and you think survivors are on the hunt for totems, you can torment them and they will not be able to work on them without being affected by it, which is very good, because it will warn you and give you a chance to interrupt it. And even if you don't, they will be tormented when you catch them later, which is a great thing and a unique ability of Pyramid Head that many other killers cannot really afford. So these two perks work really, really well on him. Obviously, if you're also snowballing and quickly multiplying your pressure by downing survivors quickly, these two perks will do an incredible job. And you will know where to hit and where to hurt because you will be bringing Discordance and Tinkerer to let you know where multiple survivors are at the start, give you a better chance to catch one of them off guard, or maybe even find the weaker link. Don't forget that this killer is really, really strong if survivors are not super used to playing against him. And Tinkerer to make sure that no gen goes unsupervised. Now, even though this build honestly is very good as it is, and I think it's the one I used for the 50 wins that I got on Pyramid Head back then, you can spice it up, absolutely. And one of my favorite changes that you could do to this build would be to replace Discordance and instead switch in Retribution, which will now last 15 seconds anytime cleanses a totem. You can still defend your totems like I said earlier, but now you have an extra layer of protection and information. When your first totem goes, it will always be Undying and it will trigger Retribution. And when your second totem goes, it could be Retribution and still trigger Retribution, so they might have to do 3 totems to get rid of your ruin, which is incredibly good. And anytime they do cleanse a totem, you will have the auras of everyone on the map for that long. This can let you know where a survivor is vulnerable and hit them through the wall. This can be helpful mid-chase to hit 6 shots. Don't forget that Retribution doesn't always give a prompt on screen, and at least survivors don't always realize it. And it can also help you to understand whether or not you should be caging someone. The information, no matter when it happens, almost always would be useful for this killer. And the better Pyramid Head you are, and the more used you are to hitting the survivors through walls, this perk will come in handy. Of course, Tinkerer itself is also a pretty decent pick for this, especially if you have range add-ons. Anytime a gen is close to being completed, you can carefully approach and hit from the edge, and with Discordance, if you opt for that, you could be hitting multiple survivors on a generator through walls, which is really, really powerful and really disorients them and sets them up for a follow-up attack. So yeah, very basic build, nothing to see here. That being said, if you want to get better at Pyramid Head and perhaps want to steer away from the Hex-heavy build that I just presented, a completely reasonable alternative would be to go for something like this, which has Corrupt Intervention and Lethal Pursuer. The first few gens will be blocked, which has fine synergy with his power, allowing you to maybe set up a few trails along the way, and you will see where all the survivors are so that you can immediately start pressuring someone, and if your first chases are fast, it's hard to come back from that. On top of that, with range add-ons, Lethal Pursuer, no joke, can allow you to hit a survivor hiding behind cover very, very on and set yourself up for a very, very short first chase. And on top of that, we have a perk to help you in this first chase, and obviously in all the ones to come, in the form of All Ears. This perk has still, to my liking, a little bit too much of a cooldown, hence why I don't recommend it on several other killers, but it is a really sweet pick on this killer that helps you get better and understand how survivors move after they vault. Very unexpected, a very quiet perk that will catch survivors off guard. If you're a complete beginner and you don't understand how to hit through walls very well, you could switch this up for Zanchin Tactics, which will highlight pallets and windows. Helps a little bit to line up your shots until you get the hang of it. And if you want to go another route, you could run Haunted Ground. With Corrupt Intervention, survivors will be running through the map, they'll probably notice the totems, and the ability to insta-down for 60 seconds on this killer is actually quite scary. It can force survivors to step on your trails more, and it can force them to do obvious decisions and obvious moves that set them up, even if you don't insta-down them for a quick punishment range attack. So, a great choice on him. And your final perk can be No Way Out. Now, No Way Out, truth be told, it only works if you hook people. However, in almost any natural cycle of hook, cages, hook, cages, hooks, you almost always hook survivors at least once. So, for the most part, during your normal games, even though you might be caging a survivor once or twice, you will also hook them afterwards once or twice. So, this perk is really, really good on Pyramid Head because of his ability to quickly deal with endgame scenarios. If you have multiple survivors on the ground for other killers near the end, it's very possible that by the time you pick one up and hook them, then the other survivor will use Unbreakable and escape. With this killer, not so much. If you have multiple survivors on the ground, you can quickly send one in a cage and then hook the other, or chop one of them in half and then hook the other. Your ability to quickly deal with those situations is very, very good. If you really want to double down on the No Way Out, which I've done and it's really fun, you could also replace the previous perk for a Bitter Murmur, which would give you a radiography of sorts, a situational report of sorts of where everyone is at the end, and also shows you the aura of people fleeing generators, which can set you up for nice range punishment hits. So with that, you have two of the most consistent and fun and strong builds on Pyramid Head, although lots of other things are probably worth trying on him. If you do try something that seems more consistent and strong than this, I would be very interested to let me know about it. Alright, it's time to talk about the Blight, a character that is fun, strong, interesting, and whose builds are the most boring thing on this green earth. I hate talking about his builds because they are just so bloody generic, but here we are. We have Corrupt Intervention, block away the furthest generators, quickly find a survivor, make the other 4 generators now be very hard to complete in a timely manner. Ruin. Anytime he is downing multiple people and pulling people off generators, this regresses them and hurts. When it's gone, you still have Pop Goes the Weasel as a plan B, which is disgusting, and you'll never miss a chance to use it because Tinkerer will let you know where the generators are being completed. I hate how stupidly effective this build is. That being said, if this is too much slowdown for your frail body, you could dial it back a little bit. You could go for something such as Corrupt Intervention, still slow down at the start. Lethal Pursuer, which can allow you as a Blight to immediately find someone and slap them 10 seconds into the match, especially with the right add-ons. You could keep Pop, and then your final perk could be something like Barbecue and Chili to give you sustained information throughout the match. And here's the thing, you can switch these perks in and out however you would like, which is just so silly. If you need extra slowdown, slap Ruin back into the build instead of Barbecue. If you need a bit of endgame potential, No Way Out instead of Barbecue. With Pop, Eruption can be okay. Oppression can actually be okay. Even perks that do not make any sense on this killer, like Haunt the Ground, Devour Hope, are still very, very, very good because of the sheer pressure and the sheer ability to be where you need to be and go where you need to go in just seconds, which of course only gets more and more annoying with strong and stronger add-ons. If Blood Favor really comes from the PTB being really strong, you could go for a full Hex build, including Blood Favor, making it very difficult for survivors to ever do anything against you. So yeah, the Blight is just absolutely disgusting in his ability to take the meta perks to the next level. So please do me a favor, and if you're already getting better at Blight, do consider switching things up. There's a lot of fun underused perks that are really, really fun on him that I hope that you'll be trying instead of just the absolute sweatiest build you possibly can. So yeah, do have fun and tell me if you know of a underrated fun perk on him, because I am sick of running this build on Blight. It's a turn for the twins, and with the twins we have a pair of killers that have subtly changed over the months, and the meta around them has also changed a little bit. We'll get into that. I believe the most reliable and strong build I can recommend for them right now is this one. It includes Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, Barbecue and Chili, and No Way Out. Now, Corrupt Intervention, very basic perk, slows down the game, cuts the map in about a third, pushes survivors towards you, passive slowdown, doesn't require any input from you other than being smart on how you play around it. And then we have Deadlock. In place of Deadlock, you could very well run Ruin, which is probably stronger, but can be cleansed, or Pop, which is also stronger, but requires quite a bit of planning and input from your side. With Deadlock, however, you have a passive perk that anytime a generator gets completed, the next gen with most brokers will get blocked, giving you extra time to get that pickup, to get someone down with Victor, do whatever you have to do passively. And you also see the generator highlighted in white. If you're Victor, you don't see the white highlight, but you still see the generator being blocked by the entity in red, so you can easily tell this perk works just fine with Victor. And this little bit of extra time that you gain passively is very, very, very handy, because the twins right now, even more than before, they are really pressed for time. With Barbecue and Chili, you have the ability to see people on gens to get an idea of what's going on. You can also see them in the open, especially useful if they are healing, and you can catch them with Victor or in some bad spot, and then you can hit them with Charlotte, then send Victor after them. It also works out quite well near the endgame, and for the endgame, you have a powerful trump card in the form of No Way Out. If you have hooked 2 or 3 survivors, the endgame will be awfully painful, and at that point, if they're a little bit slow in healing or if they make a little bit of a mistake, you can use Victor and Charlotte to control the gates and make it very difficult for them to touch them, and later for the No Way Out blockage to end before you get an additional 1 or 2 kills. So I think a very, very good perk that can save games on its own. That being said, you do have a lot of alternatives. If you do not like Barbecue, Discordance is a fine choice. If you do not like No Way Out, Sloppy Butcher, Scorch Hook, Gift of Pain, anything that slows down Thanosphobia is never a terrible idea. Although I do have a feeling that survivors are getting bolder and faster with their healing items lately and healing perks, so I don't think I would run that. If you are assaulted by several medkits, perhaps using the Spitting Top add-on to make them drop it might be a more successful idea in the long run. What is a build I would have recommended some time ago that I'm now a little bit more on the fence about? We could run something like Ruin, Undying, along with Discordance, and maybe still No Way Out, or if you're going to go the full Hex route, even Hex Crowd Control. Now, Discordance triggers for Victor and Charlotte. Victor doesn't see the aura turning yellow, but you can still hear it and figure it out. So, very good perk from the start and throughout the match. And Ruin and Undying used to be a staple of Twins. You get to a generator, you send Victor over, you do some damage, Charlotte is there, so no one can touch the gen slowly regresses. But Ruin and Undying is not as powerful as it was before the Undying nerf that made Undying protect Ruin multiple times. And of course, people are getting better at dealing with totems. So you'll find that the Corrupt and Deadlock combination from earlier probably works more reliably. With Crowd Control, you have a cute perk that works also passively. Anytime a survivor fast bolts a window, the window is blocked, which makes chasing with Victor a little bit easier if you're into that. But you do have quite a few options. That being said, don't forget that survivors will be smart. If you down a survivor with Victor, you have a very, very long cooldown. You can be kicked, so don't slug too much or bring perks that rely on that too much. If you hop onto a healthy survivor, they can very well take Victor for a spin for a long time, so be ready for that. And be smart in how you set things up and how you use your perks, because you will need it. Reaching the Trickster, we have a perfectly fine killer that unfortunately comes with the Huntress syndrome of not being able to synergize very well with several strong popular perks. He has low mobility, he doesn't basic attack in most of his chases, using his knives instead. He has a lullaby that announces his arrival, despite terror radius being smaller or bigger. So that makes many perks awkward on him that would otherwise be good on other killers. Still, you have many underrated perks that actually work out quite well on him, and he also has other meaningful choices to make, so let's go over them. The perk build that I would recommend would include Ruin, Undying, and Tinkerer for gen control, and No Way Out as a bit of an endgame gamble. Now, Ruin and Undying obviously can and will be cleansed, but until that is gone, you have a very, very good way to passively defend generators while you do your thing and maybe stop to reload and pick up and hook and whatnot. With Tinkerer, hopefully, even though you cannot react to it as much as other more agile killers, you will hopefully have an idea of which gens are being done so that you can defend them and do two things at once. Don't forget that Trickster is an incredibly strong area defender. If you have a hook in the open next to a generator in the open, no survivor can come and do any bold plays if you're nearby, because as long as there's line of sight in the open, you will shred through their health states, and that will be very, very bad for them. So with Tinkerer, Ruin, and Undying, you set yourself up for these situations, hopefully, where you are playing at your strongest rather than chase around the map, having to reload and being in loops where your power is worthless. and you cannot get down quickly enough. That being said, if Ruin Undying Tinkerer doesn't seem to tickle your fancy, you can customize this in a number of ways. You could run Ruin and Pop, you could run Corrupt and Pop, you could run Corrupt Pop, and instead of Tinkerer you could run Barbecue, or any other sort of generator info perk, such as Thrill and Tremors if you're going to go with Pop, or Surveillance if you're going to go with Ruin, and most of these options would be at least decent compared to this. Now, the final perk I do recommend very highly is No Way Out. No Way Out allows you to commit to a camp if you have to during the mid and the end game. You're not a killer that can easily navigate around the map to find that one survivor that you need to kill. Sometimes if a survivor is in a bad spot, you'll just need to leave them because you're not prepared to down them in a place where your power doesn't do anything. So for that reason, you sometimes will be forced to do trays and hooks and to hook people that you're not really invested in killing early. With No Way Out, that ends up playing in your favor later on. If there's someone that needs to die on the hook and there's 20 seconds left for them to die, you don't need to worry about the last gen or two. With Tinkerer, you're going to know how long they're going to take, so you can commit, especially if you have Tinkerer, you can commit to the camp, make it almost impossible for them to rescue, and then when that person is dead and the final gen perhaps is about to pop, you still have a huge ace in your sleeve to play out and to benefit from that decision that you made earlier. Whereas if you didn't have this perk, it's very likely that that camp would result in the other 3 survivors escaping. So for that reason, I think this perk works really well, and it's a really nice insurance if the game didn't go according to your plans. That being said, there are a lot of other interesting picks that you could go with, that you could pick for Trickster. One that you'll see many people run is Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden will make it so that survivors scream when they get out of lockers, but more importantly, they'll make you reload faster. I don't think this is the greatest pick ever, although it is a cute 4th perk to run. If you run Iron Maiden on Barbecue and Chili together, survivors will not be able to hide in lockers, for example, from a distance without letting you know. And the faster reload can be okay. Although I think that with add-ons, you probably don't benefit from this fast reload nearly as much as you think. Other perks that I found a bit more successful, Bamboozle. The Trickster struggles in places like Shack, where the walls are very tall and survivors will run you very tightly. You're 110 and you don't have line of sight. If you are afraid of that, Bamboozle can shut that down very quickly. Unfortunately, there's also many maps where Bamboozle will just not do enough for you, and it might feel like a waste of a perk slot. So it's a bit of an insurance perk if you want to run it. Personally, I've come to the conclusion that it's almost better to just give up on your weaknesses and focus on your strengths. And if you want to do that, a perk that's a little bit underrated that works really well on Trickster is Agitation. With Agitation, you can place survivors in the basement hooks from a much further distance. You can also waste less time in placing them next to a gen that's about to be done so that you can defend them both. And overall, it works quite well. If you get a free hit because survivors don't expect the Agitation speed, that also works out in your favor. So Agitation is also a cute 4th perk. And depending on how strong it is after the PTB, Blood Favor, Hex Blood Favor could also be interesting. If you land a single knife, Blood Favor triggers and blocks the pallets. I don't think that's how it will work. Personally, after the PTB, I'm sure you'll need to land all of your knives and do 1 health state of damage. But even in that situation, with some of these add-ons, I think Blood Favor could be an interesting pick to make him a little bit more oppressive in chase and make them have to rely on windows even more. So that's pretty much it for Trickster. A difficult killer, much like Huntress. I think your success on him will depend a lot more on your playstyle and your skill rather than your perks themselves. But do let me know if you have found another combination of perks that really truly do bring out his potential. And with that, we arrive to the Nemesis. Very quickly, what are the Nemesis strengths? He has a passive ability that can feed him information, that can bother and disturb and stall survivors, sometimes even landing you hits for free. Although they are inconsistent, the zombies are definitely part of his power. And then from close up, in almost any loop in the game, a good Nemesis can hit you in a matter of seconds. The best thing you can do as a survivor is make that hit not count too much and try to make distance. and he will need to hit you 2 more times to get it down with his whip. However, two major things going for Nemesis. He can zone you very, very well with a distant and low recovery cooldown whip, which makes a follow-up hit very difficult to avoid. And he's also arguably the best pallet destroyer out of all of the killers in the game, which means that once you pre-drop a pallet, that pallet's gone right before it hits the ground sometimes, which is insane. That being said, how do we cover for his weaknesses? How do we make his zombies more consistent? The truth is, you just run the very basic, generic meta perks that every other killer benefits from, and that's typically good enough. I do recommend the Undying variation of the Ultra Regression build. You have Discordance and Tinkerer for information of where multiple survivors are being gathered and where a generator is about to be completed, and Ruin and Undying. Ruin and Undying might last a little bit longer than typical. Even Ruin on its own, I think, is really worth running. If zombies harass survivors, they cannot do totems in peace, and if they harass them at generators, these generators regress and sometimes give you a visual indication of that. Tinkerer is really nice. Anything that removes your terror radius, believe it or not, is very good on Nemesis. Even though he is a tall and very loud killer, I guarantee you losing your terror radius will set you up for situations where it's one whip and one whip, or one whip and you're down. And another thing that's incredibly worth mentioning about Discordance is that Discordance will alert nearby zombies. Oddly enough, zombies do hear the Discordance pop up before it even shows for you. This means that especially in the final generators and potentially at the start, you will have zombies that are not roaming around the map aimlessly, but rather going towards the survivors. Even if you happen to go there yourself, it's still a very good thing that in your next chase you now have a zombie potentially helping you out and being an element of the map that survivors have to carefully navigate around, and it's just so damn good. Now, other perks like Pop Goes the Weasel, Barbecue and Chili and so on are still strong. For Pop in particular, please consider that if you stop to kick a generator, you are giving them a lot of distance potentially, and then you'll need to catch up, and then potentially you need to hit them 3 more times. So this does remove a bit of your ability to zone. So I think passive abilities like Corrupt are a little bit better for Nemesis than the ones that require you to invest a lot of time, such as Pop Goes the Weasel. That being said, many options. If you want to have an alternative build that features Save the Best for Last, this would be it. This is a different way of slowing down the game that I also think works out okay. You have Save the Best for Last, which will make you punch survivors very quickly. Search, which will make the nearby gens explode, and Ruin. And the nice thing about Ruin and Search is that they actually work together quite well. If Ruin is there, the gens regress, and they take an additional damage from Search if that happens. And if Ruin is gone, Search can still carry you significantly and help you out in most maps, except for perhaps the really large ones where, admittedly, it is a little bit hard to make work. But still, the Ruin and Search is very good. With Tinkerer in this build, you still have a very solid idea. If you don't like Tinkerer, you could also replace it for Corrupt Intervention, and that would work out okay. And if you're not a big fan of Save the Best for Last, which I think works alright on Nemesis, Haunted Ground is also an idea. The idea behind both Haunted and Save the Best for Last is to down survivors very quick with your basic attacks. You get to tier 2 as soon as humanly possible. That's where you can drop, where you can break pallets. And then from that point on, you either concentrate on the obsession with Save the Best for Last, or try to seize the best opportunity to use Haunted Ground if it comes into play. And what this achieves basically is survivors will run from pallet to pallet. You will break them very fast, you will hit them, recover very quickly, and then be able to use your tentacle in succession. I think, however, that this build can be a bit of a noob trap. You don't realize how good the Nemesis whip actually is and how much you can zone survivors and make 2 hits happen very close to each other until you really learn to rely on your whip. So even though this build is by all means very strong, I think I achieved 25 wins at least 2 or 3 times with a variation of this build. even though I really reckon it's really strong, it might keep you from understanding the full potential of using your whip. And most of these builds will work regardless of add-ons. Most of your add-on choices will be pretty similar no matter what you go for. But of course, do keep your add-ons in mind when you make a build for Nemesis. Almost anything else that you could think as being fun or more conventional would probably still work. But do keep in mind that your zombies will largely be inconsistent across many matches, so don't rely on them too much to do the job for you and to give you information for you, because they can be misleading. That being said, that's Nemesis. Have fun with him. Try fun perks of him. He can use perks that other killers don't really get much use of. One of my favorites being Spirit Fury. With Spirit Fury, it's totally okay to leave a pallet down and break it later to get the stack, because if a survivor goes to it, you can hit them over the pallet with your tentacle, and you break pallets so quickly that you will charge it super fast. And if one pallet is giving you trouble and a survivor is playing really well around it, then you play very aggressively, and if they drop it, you catch them with your tentacle in 2 seconds after that happens. So definitely do find things to spice up your builds. Once you get better and better at playing Nemesis, you'll thank me for that. And finally, we've reached the final killer of the video for now, the Cenobite. And he is one of those killers whose add-ons are very transformative, and you probably want to really keep in mind what build you're running with them to make the most out of their value. I'm going to give you a build that I think is strong and decently reliable with little to no add-ons, but if you're going to use a variety of add-ons, do use your best judgment. If you're gonna run an add-on like the Engineer's Fang to immediately injure survivors with your chain, then you don't need an insta-down perk, for instance. Use your common sense and you'll be fine. Now, what do I like about this build? With Corrupt Intervention and Lethal Pursuer, along with Hex Ruin and Hex Devour Hope. This build is very mean. With Corrupt Intervention, you force survivors to start walking towards you and get to the center of the map and not immediately sit on gens. If you do not find the cube, this is good, because it will buy you time for the chain hunt to begin and for them to be harassed by the chains before they can knock out a gen or two. But the thing is, with Lethal Pursuer, you have a very strong chance of actually finding the cube yourself. I've made a video covering this, but basically there is a certain logic to where the cube spawns, and if at the start of the match you see where you spawn yourself and you see the spawn locations of all 4 survivors, you have a very good chance to be able to figure out where the cube is with, I'm not going to say complete certainty, but with a very large degree of success. And picking up the cube from the beginning with Corrupt and Ruin makes it very hard for the survivors to get gens done. On top of that, it gives you a good idea of where it will spawn next. And if you keep chasing those people that could be going for it, the cube will constantly be harassed out of their hands, back into yours with the chain hunt, resetting on and on. Very powerful. If you go to an indoor map or a map with a strange shape, then it's harder to find the cube. But in these maps, Corrupt Intervention is an absolute soul destroyer for survivors who are searching frantically room to room only to find corrupted gem after corrupted gem. So these 2 perks by themselves are very good. Obviously, it also tells you where survivors are, so that stealth at the start of the match is almost never an issue. And well, the Ruin and Devour are just 2 perks that, yes, they can find. In fact, they might find them faster, thanks to Corrupt Intervention pushing them. But they are perks that they cannot ignore. With the chain hunts going on, and one person constantly potentially being on the hunt for the box, the generators are hard to complete with Ruin. And with Devour, you have a massive threat. And the idea of all of this, of course, is that they have to worry about gens, they have to worry about the box, they have to worry about you potentially one-shotting them and mooring them, and that's when things get a little bit overwhelming. And that's the idea behind this build, to constantly harass the box from the very beginning out of their hands, and to force them to do side objectives and be overwhelmed to the point where 1 or 2 of them die early and the generators are not getting done. That being said, tons and tons of ways you could approach this. Instead of Corrupt Intervention, you could welcome them to sit on gens and run Undying instead to protect the Ruin and the Devour, and that would be a fine idea. Instead of Lethal Pursuer allowing you to figure out where the cube is, some people like to run the perk Franklin's Demise and or Hoarder. Both of these perks help in harassing the cube. A Hoarder will literally let you know when a survivor picks up the cube. Because they often have to drop their items first, they also will show up from this perk when they pick up their own items. And yeah, it can help you if you're not aware to know where the cube is being picked up and where you can go and harass it. Am I the biggest fan of Franklin's and Hoarder? In my opinion, no. If you go against a lobby with no items, Franklin's is not worth it, even if you think it's worth it for the cube. And Hoarder can be replaced by just using your brain and figuring out where the survivors are and looking at the HUD and understanding where the cube could have spawned. I think these perks are good on Pinhead, but I don't think they are necessary. So you could try them and see how much success you have with them. Just because you know where the cube is being picked up doesn't mean that you'll be able to stop it. Sometimes, if you don't anticipate it quickly enough, they might be able to do the cube from behind cover and you will have no hope of stopping that. That's where some add-ons like Larry's Remains could help to slow down the cube. And just because you can slap the cube out of someone's hand doesn't mean it's a good idea. You already automatically get the cube from someone's hand when you down them. So in my opinion, it's much better to just be very, very good in chase, have perks that help you insta-down, if anything, to catch the person with the cube and down them and get the cube in the same motion, than to hit them, pick up the cube, then go after them, and so on and so forth. It is true that constantly picking up the cube will slow them down, but they will push through that slowdown if you're not hooking them. So only picking up the cube is not going to get you kills. It will slow them down, yes, but it will not make you progress in your objective, which at the end of the day is to kill the survivors off. As for Ruin and Devour, you could totally get rid of these if you don't like them. Many other hex perks are good on Pinhead. Know it, if you're going to use it as your only perk for obvious reasons, is powerful near the end game. Haunted Ground along with other hex perks can be very, very nasty, since you are pretty good at landing your M1s and getting insta-downs from it. Some people have talked about Save the Best for Last. I think it's a mistake, personally. I don't see it after testing it a bunch. And obviously No Way Out does give you good end game reliable second chance to help out a difficult match. So those are probably the perks that I would consider on him. Again, think carefully about your add-ons and which ones help your perks the most, or which perks you can give up on because your add-ons are already giving you that information, or because they're already helping you to get a health state off survivors, and so on and so forth. And you will probably do okay with Pinhead. And yeah, maybe don't forget to check that one video where I do explain the spawn logic for the cube. And with that, I think we've finally covered all of the killers. I hope that you found this video interesting. As a final reminder, there will be a link down below to a spreadsheet that should have this information and more. And if it's been a while since I uploaded this video, you will find perhaps even more up-to-date builds down there if something seemed wrong. So yeah, do check that out. And thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one.